Suppose I have. It'll be fine, said Rain. Evelyn swallowed. I know what you're trying to do. This map, I said. It's at your house, where you grew up, isn't it? Evelyn nodded and looked away. I don't want to, Rain. I don't want visit, I don't want to see it, I don't want to go. You and Heather can go, if you must. I'll call ahead, let my father know, but I am not coming. Don't be daft, Rain said. I can't leave you here alone. It's all of us or none of us. All for one and one for all, I said. I'd meant it as a joke, to lighten the mood, but the words seemed too real as I spoke them. Even if I did want to, I can't leave Sherrowford. You think I was joking? Evelyn gestured behind her, past Preem 2, toward the ex-drawing room. I have miles to go, much more to do in there before this is under control. I hadn't set foot in the drawing room in 3 weeks. She'd turned it into a mage's atelier, and Rain had done her best to keep me away from the worst of what Evelyn was up to. The rest of the house was free game, from Rain's new bedroom and the delights of the study, to the abandoned old sitting room on the opposite side of the house and the dank cellar filled to the brim with boxes and cobwebs. When it's all over then, Rain said. We'll take a trip, together. Evelyn stared into her tea. I'll think about it. We all had class today. Evelyn grumbled about the need to keep up a front of normality. She downed some breakfast and stood up to vanish into the ex-drawing room for a couple of hours. Evie. I stopped her before she left. She turned and raised an eyebrow at me. I know, Heather, I know. Your quest takes first priority once I'm dash. No, it's not that. I shook my head. Are you okay? She regarded me for a long, silent moment. I'm used to this. Rain told me not to worry about Evie. Rain certainly didn't seem to be doing so. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, working my slow way through a second Pop-Tart. I tried to focus on the essay I needed to write over the next week. 16th-century poetry and Shakespearean dialogue served as a weak bastion against the lessons of the eye. By the time I'd made my way back upstairs for a morning shower, I had to pause and brace myself against the wall with one hand, scraps of impossible math struggling to the surface of my mind. Breathe. Steady. Focus on breathing, in and out, in and out. Only breathing. I didn't hear Rain climb the stairs behind me, didn't know she was there until she grabbed me by the shoulders. I squeaked in surprise. Rain dash. She pushed me against the wall, firm but gentle, smug look on her face as she held me there and leaned in. Rain flushed the impossible math from my consciousness far more completely than I ever could alone, when she clamped her mouth over mine and shoved a hand down the front of my pajama bottoms. You need it, she purred when we broke apart. I managed a nod. Turned out the trick to beating the eye's lessons was to bonk like rabbits. We'd done so for the last 3 weeks. Intimacy was incredible. Not since Maisie had I felt so close to another person. Rain taught me the reality of many things I'd spent years fantasizing over. What surprised me the most, after a week or two, is that it didn't change me, not really. Intimacy healed wounds, lifted me up, but sex isn't magic. In the morning, I was always the same Heather. I was more Heather. More me. She hadn't let me move in though. Rain had moved into Evelyn's house, simply the house, in our increasingly shared vernacular the following day after Evelyn had extended the invitation. She moved back into what I took to be her old bedroom, quickly filled it with posters and her stacks of philosophy books and a few other odds and ends wrangled from the squat, including the game console, set up with a borrowed television. Rain and I had taken the last journey from her old place together, piled into her tiny, rickety car, a miniature adventure down Sherrowford streets. Her new old room was much bigger and comfier, with space to push armchairs up against one wall and roll off either side of the double bed as one pleased. She dragged an old desk from one of the other upstairs rooms. Really spread out. No need for me to take another room. We could share this one, together. Evelyn made obscure jokes about lesbian second dates, which I totally didn't understand, but to my incredible surprise she made Rain blush. Instead, we had our first real argument. Not a blazing row. Neither of us was capable of that. This place is going to fill up with monsters, Heather. Evie could turn this into ground zero, she'd said. Nothing's happened. It's been nearly a week, nothing has happened. And if we're all going to die suddenly, I'd rather do that in the same bed as you. We're not going to die dash. Then why can't I move in? Because it's too dangerous. I don't think anybody is after you, and I'd rather keep it that way. I just want you to be safe. Oh, so it's safer to just visit here every day instead? Walk back and forth where anybody could see me, without you? Heather, I'm with you as much as I can be dash. Then I may as well be here all the time. We never really resolved the argument, practicality and hormones did that for us. Evelyn scolded Rain terribly for it and told me to ignore her, but I didn't need to, Rain wanted me over all the time anyway. I spent almost every day there and vanishingly little time at my own flat, which felt cold and alien and empty whenever I went back, mostly to pursue brain math and read from the notes. In those 3 weeks, I spent every night but 2 in Rain's bed, and slept better than I had in my whole life. She was used to this impermanence, moving from place to place, but for me it was a huge change, one I could barely contain. At first I felt guilty about the way my clothes and books and the thin detritus of my life began to colonize Rain's new bedroom, but then I realized she liked it, despite what she said, so I let it happen. She was right though, the house did fill up with monsters. Evelyn had been busy, up at strange hours of the night, reading and making notes from her disturbing tomes, locked away in the drawing room scribbling magic circles on the floor and peering into her giant scrying pool. Preem 1 and Preem 2 were out more often than not, and sometimes returned with torn clothes and oddly bloodless physical damage, wood grain visible inside their wounds, from fighting monsters inside the cult's rabbit holes. Evelyn repaired them with magic and polyfiller. She called up the second monster in the dead of night on a Friday, and only emerged from the drawing room 12 grueling hours later, wan and exhausted but smug and victorious. Rain and I had heard her talking and debating in at least 4 different languages that entire time, replies and questions addressed to her in an unspeakable, twisted voice from the pit. The third monster she sent out into the city, a new front in her secret war. I caught a glimpse of it, unintentionally, coming downstairs as Rain had stood by while Evelyn directed it out of the back door and into the night. A gangly ape demon, knobbly joints and knuckles like cricket balls, jaw running vertically down its entire head. I'd seen worse. At least it left the house. What can I do, then? I'd asked Evelyn the next day. You can keep doing what you're doing, work through the pamphlet I gave you. Learn. Focus on your sister. I mean to help you, Evie. To help. She'd stared at me. This isn't your fight. Every day I looked at Maisie's t-shirt message, now carefully laundered and cleaned after being transcribed and photographed, though the tarry black fingerwriting refused to vanish. For pity's sake, sit down, I willed. Sit down before you fall over. Tenny wouldn't sit. I doubted Bubbling Goo's spirit life understood buses anyway. I suffered in silence and fought a most irritating urge to whisper to her, tell her off, but I could hardly raise my voice in public to speak with a monster nobody else could see. That was beyond the pale. The tentacled woman swayed and staggered in the middle aisle of the number 37 bus, on the route from Sherrowford University to the city center. There were plenty of open seats. I had almost the entire left side to myself. I hadn't grown comfortable with pneumosomatic life. One does not get comfortable about decade-old taboos and traumas in the space of 3 weeks, or even 3 months, even when a flash of the fractal on my left arm was more than enough to clear my path. But the tentacled woman had never left. I named her Tenny. A name made her less upsetting. She'd hung around Barnslow Drive like a stray cat, prowling the street and the back garden, following me to campus and my flat, but she never again risked coming closer than a few feet, no matter how much I coaxed and cooed in private. I'd told Rain and Evelyn, received unhelpful jokes and a terrifying magical suggestion respectively. Evelyn had taken steps to confirm Tenny wasn't a servitor, and I'd settled on just letting her follow me around. After a week, I almost managed to forget she was there. Tenny did not appear to comprehend chairs. The bus rounded another corner and she staggered, lost her balance, tentacles reaching up to anchor herself against the roof of the bus. At least she was a good distraction from the lump in my throat. I glanced down at my phone, at the text message conversation with Rain. Rain is typing. I'd waited until I was on the bus, fare paid, sat down and committed, before I'd sent Rain a text message to let her know where I was going. I'd hoped for a, be safe, have fun, but my mind had played out an embarrassing scene of her dropping everything and sprinting across campus to catch up. The reality was only marginally less upsetting. I couldn't stop myself rereading the message log and making myself feel guilty. What do you mean, into town? You're on your own. Where are you now? Already on the bus. It's fine, I'm going to the bookshop. I'll only be a couple of hours. It's not safe. 3 exclamation points, I'd never seen Rain do that before. I can come with you. What bus are you on? It's fine, I'm fine, it'll be fine. Please, it's fine. Fine, fine, fine. I swallowed and forced myself to turn the phone screen off. 2 days after my demonstration to Evelyn, I was seeking a much-needed psychological balm, book shopping. It was the middle of the day and Sherrowford's main high street thronged with shoppers, nothing to be scared of amid the busy crowds, except for the spirits and monsters hunched atop the rows of buildings, snapping at each other as they skirmished for territory. The press of humanity somehow kept them mostly away from the busy road, the passing buses, the traffic lights and the bright window displays pretending to be clean amid the city's grime. I stepped off the bus and Tenny followed, tentacles probing passers-by. My phone vibrated, kept vibrating. I stepped out of the pedestrian flow next to a shop front, then sighed in exasperation when I saw Rain was calling me. I answered. I'm fine, I'm fine. I tried to keep my voice steady, tamp down the guilt. Hey, Heather, said Rain. You don't need to go out alone. You're supposed to be in a lecture, Rain. Ah, it doesn't matter. Come on, where are you at? I'll come join you. And you have to walk Evelyn home after class, don't you? Rain had spent the last 3 weeks juggling both of us. I don't know how she did it. She walked me to and from campus, and she walked Evelyn everywhere. She turned up after lectures and raced back home to pick whoever was alone. She split herself both ways and somehow never seemed to tire, on top of a part-time evening job behind the bar in the student union. But over time, inevitably, she came to prioritize Evelyn. I don't know if it was years-old habit, or merely because she thought Evelyn was in more danger, despite the intimacy she shared with me, intimacy I was certain she didn't share with Evie. Which is why I was off to browse books on my own, with only numismatic stalkers for company. Rain paused for a long moment on the other end of the phone. In my mind's eye I saw her struggling with the decision, keep it light, or get serious. Evie can wait in the medieval metaphysics room, Rain said, choosing the latter as her voice hardened. It's not safe out on your own. Let me come get you. I sighed, a tightness gripping my chest. Rain, it's the middle of the day. There are dozens of people around. Nothing has happened in 3 weeks. Nobody is going to clock me over the head in broad daylight. Go back to class. You never dash. Didn't Evelyn already clear out the city center? I lowered my voice. Yeah, but dash. Rain, I love it when you're my knight in shining armor, but you don't need to be right now. Saying no to Rain was difficult. Refusing her care and attention and endless doting affection was not easy. I swallowed a hiccup. I've got the charm in my pocket. It's broad daylight. Evelyn had given Rain and I slips of stiff paper, stamped with a symbol very much like the fractal, told us to keep them on ourselves. A sort of lock against wandering into another concealed entrance to the cult's shadow city. Heather, please. I'm fine, I'll be fine. I'll be home in under 2 hours. Please relax. I'll see you later. Okay. Rain's tone made it clear she was fighting with herself. Be safe, okay? Call me if anything happens. I'll see you at home. Take care. We said goodbye and I ended the call. My mood was in the toilet. Tenny hovered nearby, peering at me. Pedestrians walked right through her. The city center was perfectly safe, nothing to be scared of. I believed every word I'd said to Rain, otherwise I wouldn't be down here, but I still hated crowds. I felt stiff and awkward out in public, around so many people, already regretting the decision to do this alone even without the impact of Rain's worry. Even well-rested and together, cared for and sane, I was still a jittery mess. Rain had first taken me down here 2 weeks back, to shop for clothes. That trip had been bliss. We'd visited one of the bigger department stores together. Rain had coaxed me into trying on clothes I'd never normally have dared, things that felt like they weren't for me, weren't meant for somebody like me, were meant for people far more comfortable, not incomplete phantoms missing half their souls. She'd bought me a high-waisted skirt and colored tights, things I could never bring myself to wear in public, along with a new jumper and a wonderfully comfortable pink hoodie. Hoodies weren't me, let alone pink, or so I'd thought. Wearing it made me feel oddly self-conscious but also safe and enclosed, feminine and warm, ways I'd always wanted to be allowed to feel. Rain's gift helped me feel more like me. I wore the hoodie now, under my coat for extra layers in the growing winter cold, along with one of Rain's t-shirts against my skin, plucked still warm from her bed this morning. Down the high street and off through a side road, past the Coachman's Arms and the tiny video game store where Rain knew the staff by name. Another turn, another, and then finally down an alleyway, thin and crooked and paved 100 years ago. All my trepidation and jitters fell away at the sight of Mountamay second-hand books. Sherriford boasted 3 bookshops, if one did not count the obligatory student bookshop on the university campus, which mostly stocked overpriced set texts for naive undergrads such as myself. The big chain store in the shopping mall was too bright and too new, books crowded out by DVDs and endless special offers, colorful displays and unnervingly jolly staff. A charity bookshop sat like a boil at the top end of the high street, stuffed with the dregs of popular hardbacks. And then there was a May, tucked away like a hidden gem. Rain had shown me it as a gift. I had to duck slightly as I entered, the doorway cramped even for me. Tenny followed, whipping her tentacles in behind and then stilling at the atmosphere inside. Even a spirit felt this. Amay Secondhand Books was a rickety 4-story structure, carved out of what had once been a terraced tenement house a century ago. Bare wooden floors, leaning racks stuffed with all manner of books, low ceilings and narrow aisles. The shop smelled of incense and paper, dry and clean, despite the huge peace lilies and spider plants on every tilted creaking floor. The owner was a tiny old Chinese lady made out of leather and steel wool. She could often be found pottering between the stacks, attempting to impose some order on this endless mass of texts. If you engaged her in conversation as Rain had, one discovered a sharp mind and a dirty sense of humor. The lad behind the counter this morning, pierced and tattooed like a punk band frontman, nodded and smiled a hello to me as I shuffled inside, and I actually smiled back. Heaven. Second only to the library. I had little money to spare, but in here £5 could net me 2 or 3 paperbacks. I figured I'd earned it. I'd earned a moment's respite from brain math and horror and university essay writing. I'd be no good to Maisie if I burnt out. I spent a lovely half-hour browsing through the books, discovering strange titles I'd never heard of, thumbing through 50-year-old copies of classics with creased spines and dented corners. I found a second edition of Watership Down and almost purchased it right then, but forced myself to leave it behind for now and work my way up the staircases, to the even more cramped fourth floor with the low ceiling beams and tottering stacks of specialist literature, religion and philosophy. Rain would understand these books. Half of them went over my head. I plucked Hegel off a shelf and peered inside, lost in the text as a few other would-be antiquarians shuffled books and sniffed and departed back down the stairs to the lower floors. My phone buzzed with a text message. Rain again. Just got out of class. Please tell me you're okay. Oh, she was so sweet it hurt. I felt terribly guilty. Now I'd had time to unwind, I questioned why on earth I'd done this, why had I come alone? I could have waited until later this afternoon, gone together with her. I loved doing things with Rain. Was this passive-aggressive behavior on my part? Getting back at her for prioritizing Evelyn? It was, wasn't it? I need to apologize. In person. I sighed to myself and sent a reply, along with a quick picture of the row of philosophy books. I am fine. All is well. Look what I found. A moment later, Rain sent me a huge ASCII art image of worried face. I almost giggled and felt even worse, it even looked a tiny bit like her. Had she made that? As I puzzled over a reply, or perhaps a resolution to head home already, Tenny reappeared. She'd followed me out of the stairwell onto the fourth floor, but then she'd stalked off around the opposite side of the room, like an inquisitive dog sniffing for interesting scents. She'd vanished behind the shelves, perhaps to investigate the other customers in the bookshop or for some unfathomable ends of her own. I'd put her from my mind, but now I looked up as she slid around the side of the nearest bookcase. What do you think? I whispered to her. Shall I buy a book for Rain? A present to go with my apology. I froze. Tenny was pointing back down the stairs with all her tentacles. She bobbed and weaved her strange wiry body, staring at me with those huge deep-sea eyes, black tarflesh quivering. One tentacle whipped over her head to point in the other direction, into the depths of the bookshop shelves, then whirled back to jab down the stairs. Oh, that's definitely communication, I murmured, wide-eyed. Hello you. I glanced around quick, made sure no other customers were close by. Tenny pointed again, the mass of ropey black tentacles retracting and bunching up like a squid before arcing toward the stairs. Trying to suggest a book I missed. I whispered. What do you dash? Tenny shook herself, tentacles flexing and vibrating. If I hadn't known better, I'd have sworn she was expressing frustration. She stepped closer to me than she'd risked in weeks and stuck out the tip of one tentacle. I blinked at her. You want to talk? I said out loud, then caught myself and looked around again in embarrassed paranoia. Nobody had heard, nobody cared. She and I were alone in this corner, secluded behind a wall of old books. I smiled at my strange spirit stalker, almost delighted, confused at my own reaction. All my life I'd hated these things. The center of her chest split open into that black, lipless mouth I'd seen before, slapping and flapping. A drumming noise echoed from the limits of perception. She flicked the tentacle tip closer, all caution apparently abandoned. A dripping tarry black pseudopod, covered in suckers. Too shocked for disgust, I reached out a finger, fought with a moment's hesitation, and touched Tenny. Contact. The distant drumming sharpened in time with the slurping of her chest mouth, first into mere sound, sucking and wet like thick mud, then into words. Non-human words through a non-human mind. I waited a beat, but they made no sense, mud words, tar words, wet and liquid. I don't understand, I whispered. Person here master leave. I blinked in shock. Bad follow person here master leave, Tenny said through the mouth in her chest. It wasn't English, the shapes, the sounds, the motion of the mouth. But that was what I heard, in a slopping mud voice, unmistakably feminine, and perhaps it was mere projection in a tone which made me think of an eager hound. Bad follow person here dash. I heard. I heard you, I whispered, my every nerve on edge. What, master? Me. Bad follow. Leave. Leave. My stomach tightened. The mere fact of communication had dazzled me, the meaning had sailed right over my head at first. I pulled my finger away from the tentacle and slowly looked around, peeking through the gaps in the shelves. How many other people were up here on the 4th floor with me? 2. 3. A blob of pneumosomatic tar dripped from my fingers and turned to smoke as it hit the floorboards. Tenny was jabbing and pointing down the stairs again. What did she mean, bad follow person? I inferred the worst. Tenny's suggestion was easily followed and cost me nothing, except peace of mind and a sliver of my sanity. I walked stiffly down the stairs to the 3rd floor, holding the handrail the whole way. She brought up the rear, guarding my back. Absurdity and paranoia. On the 3rd floor I took a deep breath and steadied myself. Tenny could have been reacting to anything, another spirit, a person she didn't like, a figment of her imagination. Could she imagine? Do tarflesh spirits dream of pneumosomatic sheep? A couple of other customers were browsing the military history and cooking sections. A harmless gray-haired man and a rotund middle-aged lady. I was in a bookshop, in the middle of the day. Nobody was following me, that would be absurd. I slipped between the shelves and glanced up at the books. In public. Perfectly safe. Tenny was having none of it. She surged around me, bobbing and weaving like a pouting octopus made of tar and rubber. A tentacle tip touched my shoulder. Bad follow. Bad follow. What does that mean? I hissed, mortified that somebody might hear me talking to thin air. I pulled down a book, cracked it open and stared at the words. Bad. Bad. Lawsy say get you out before find. Lawsy. I blinked at my tentacled friend. Why did I know that name? Who was Lawsy? Footsteps creaked on the stairs, descending from the 4th floor. I kept my face buried in the book, forced myself not to turn and watched the doorway. A person entered, crossed behind me into the stacks. I waited a minute, then turned and left, shoulder blades crawling as I took to the stairs again. Footsteps followed me, down to the 2nd floor, then to the 1st. Tenny was right. I was being stalked. My beautiful retreat was violated. I left Amy's second-hand books in a hurry, ignored the polite goodbye from the lad behind the counter as I rummaged for my phone with shaking hands. Tenny backed out behind me. Her presence offered a bizarre source of comfort, but I had neither time nor wit to stop and think about her. She hovered at my back, a good doggy, trying to hustle me on and protect me, though I knew she couldn't even touch anybody except myself. Moral support was better than no support. Out in the alleyway, tripping over my own feet, I cast glances back at the cramped bookshop doorway. Any moment a monster would emerge, unfold itself like a blossoming nightmare, and see me. My chest wrenched tight and my hands quivered, I couldn't move fast enough, breath shaking in my throat. In my panic, I'd turned the wrong way away from the high street. Round a corner, down another alley, narrower and dimmer in the shadow of the buildings, between a dark-fronted jewelry store and an abandoned hairdresser's. Behind me, a grunt and a scrape of shoes on cobble's footsteps, clacking fast, catching up. Tenny surged out, tentacles wide, a cat making herself look big. I almost dropped my phone, fumbled and caught it again, clutched it to my chest and ready to scream. Twill turned the corner, curly dark hair in stupid blue and lime coat and all. She hooked her thumbs into her jean pockets. I gaped at her. Yo, Big H, she said. You know you're being followed, right? Yes. I almost shouted. By you. Oh my God, Twill, you terrified me. Why didn't you say something, you dash? My anger drained, along with the color in my face. I hiccuped. What? Not you. F following me? Me? Twill snorted a laugh. If I wanted to stalk you, you'd never know I was there. Tenny was jabbing and feinting at Twill with her tentacles, blocking my view in the cramped cobblestone alleyway, a totally ineffectual attempt to menace a person who couldn't even see her. Stop that! I snapped. Tenny halted and bobbed back, tentacles drooping. She looked at me like a scolded dog. Twill blinked. Not you, Twill, I spluttered. There's somebody following me. There's actually a person stalking me. You're certain? She's been on your arse since the high street, followed you into that bookshop, Twill said. You didn't notice? Sort of, yes. I swallowed on a dry throat and peered over Twill's shoulder. She's not, wait, you were following me too? Twill shrugged. Well yeah, duh. Fresh fear crawled in the pit of my stomach. I reminded myself what Twill was, who she represented, this teenage girl, short as me, with a face straight from a glossy magazine cover, fluffy dark hair and a bad girl attitude stamped over a middle-class accent. She could clothe herself in wolf flesh at will. I'd seen her pull a steel chain apart with her bare hands and crack concrete with a kick. She'd recovered in moments from a laundry list of broken bones and in half an hour from magical torture. She'd fought monsters when Rain and I had fled, and could catch me in a second if I tried to run. And I'd turned down a secluded alleyway. Stupid, stupid Heather. Rain had bought me one last present when we'd gone out shopping together. She'd purchased it without my input or knowledge, then given it to me back at the house, so as not to spoil our fun day out. About the size of an egg, made for a quick and easy thumb grip with an accidental press-proof button right in the middle. Disarmingly and disgustingly pink. She'd made me promise to carry the thing. I shoved my shaking hand into my pocket and pulled out the personal attack alarm. Twill's eyebrows climbed. Whoa, is that a Tamagotchi? Sorry. She frowned. Wait, what is that? An alarm, I managed through my closing throat. Why were you following me, Twill? You were following me. Twill, you scared the piss out of me. I lowered the alarm. Twill did not possess enough guile to fake such outrage. I'm sorry, okay? You terrified me. Twill dialed back and frowned, then cracked a thin self-satisfied smile. Yeah, I did, didn't I? Fair cop. I'm good at that. I took a huge, shaking breath. I still don't, just explain, okay? Why were you following me? Caught Rain's scent in the high street, didn't I? I don't know yours well enough. Thought I'd come say hi. Twill sniffed the air as if to make her point. Where is she anyway, oh? Oh. Her eyes lit up with a dirty smirk. You're wearing, like, I dunno, one of her unwashed t-shirts or something, aren't you? I hugged my coat around myself. I am. And that's none of your business. Ah, come on, that's awesome. I said you were her girl, didn't I? She made it official and dash. Why are you here in the first place? Twill rolled her eyes. Don't get like say with me, alright? She pulled a plastic bag out of her coat pocket and showed me the contents, a video game box, still in the shrink wrap. You try ordering stuff online in Brinkwood, dickheads'll nick any package left on your doorstep. SWHY I come up Sherrowford, release day, in it. My head swam. I huffed with exasperation. Right. Video games. And somebody is following me? Yeah, some skinhead girl. Bloody criminal, Rain letting you go off on your own. This city's full of basket cases and I figure you're like a lamp to moths or some shit. Look, I'm here now, you want me to help or maybe like walk you home or dash? My mind filled with high-pitched whine, skinhead girl. Shaved head. Rare enough. What were the chances of a coincidence? Heather. Yo, Earth to Heather. Come in, cosmonaut girl? I blinked at Twill waving a hand in front of my face. Tenny had moved to my side, protective but useless against real flesh and blood. Is Dash? I swallowed on a dry throat. Is she still after me? Twill frowned at the very real panic on my face, or perhaps she saw the other emotion underneath, a feeling I couldn't process yet, new and smoldering and hot. I dunno, said Twill. D'you wanna find out? What do you mean? Twill smirked again, dangerous and wolfish even without her transformation. She grabbed my hand. I'll show you some master hunting tricks in action. Come on. Despite everything Rain had once said about this crazy little werewolf, despite her very strict instructions to call her if anything happened, I let Twill lead me out of the alleyway, around a corner, and back into the high street among the afternoon shoppers. The crowd had thickened with groups of lads, young mothers with pushchairs, and a gathering numbers of secondary school kids. It was after 3 now, the schools had let out. Twill was quick and snappy compared to my panicked confusion. She checked over our shoulders with casual ease and weaved through the crowd with apparently zero effort. She led me about 40 feet up the high street and over a pedestrian crossing, toward the big department store wedged next to Sherrowford's only indoor mall. Squatting the open space before the department store and the mall, a very ugly and ill-considered piece of modern sculpture reached toward the sky, a fountain with a huge rotating steel ball planted on top, the size of a bus. No idea what it was meant to represent. For stone benches ringed the exterior, dotted with a couple of old men sharing a cigarette and some schoolkids making noise. Twill rounded one of the empty benches and turned to watch the way we came. She scanned left and right, moving her eyes more than her head. Tenny caught up with us and crouched in front of me. A lone tentacle brushed my hand and a word reached my mind, leave. Leave. I have to call Rain. Twill frowned. No time for that, gotta keep your eyes peeled. Come on, help me out here. I stared at the moving flows of people. Why here? Why not wait in the alley? Twill pointed all her fingers out at the crowds. Sightlines, duh. You can't see. This is the best place to watch for her, she can only come from there, or there, Twill pointed. I don't follow. Twill glanced sidelong at me, obviously unimpressed. I spend most of my life reading books, not environments, I said. She shrugged. Short version, we'll see her in a sec, 'cause if she tries to go all the way around behind us, she'll risk losing your tail. Unless she's doing some weird magic shit. Twill muttered the last 2 words under her breath. Waiting was impossible. My fingers itched, my head felt light with adrenaline. I glanced down at my phone, began to call Rain. Got her, Twill said. What? Where? I expected her to point, but she just nodded vaguely, eyes fixed and staring hard. There. Where? Between the fat old guy with the awful shirt and the front of that coffee place. Right there, she's looking up the street now. Amateur, totally lost us in the crowd. Twill tooted and shook her head. My blood froze, it was her. Shaved head and whipcord tight. She was dressed differently from in the Willow House loop, jeans and an open raincoat. Ears full of metal piercings, a tattoo crawling up the side of her neck. She turned and looked the other way down the street, not a subtle stalker. You know her? Asked Twill. I swallowed, found I was shaking slightly, and forced myself to take a deep breath. She tried to shoot Rain 3 weeks ago. I nodded. The skinhead girl turned and started up the street. At that angle, she'd miss us completely. She'd lost us. Twill turned and stared, wolfish predation in her eyes. An unnameable, alien emotion burst into my chest in full color. That woman, she'd tried to kill Rain. She'd very nearly succeeded, if not for my brain math hell magic that hurt my soul to use. I didn't even know who she was, what she believed in, why she'd done it. She'd tried to kill Rain. I was afraid, almost shaking, but I'd lived with fear all my life, in a million different subtle shades and flavors. I lived fear inside out. It couldn't stop me. This was new. Anger, bright and sparking. Yes, I hissed. What's worse than being stalked? Being bait. Twill did the planning, quickly and without explanation. I didn't fully trust her, but I also didn't have time to second guess. The skinhead was going to get away. She'd walk to the end of Sherrowford High Street and disappear for another 3 weeks or 3 months, and then maybe she'd come back and I wouldn't have a convenient werewolf to sniff her out, and she would do something horrible to somebody I loved. A small voice screamed panic in the back of my head, wailed that I needed to call Rain. I needed to call my knight in shining armor. I needed to get out of here, get back to the house to home, and tell Evelyn what I'd seen. Call the cavalry and hide. Leave. Get Rain. Instead, I let a cultist werewolf girl tell me to walk down the street in plain view of a woman who tried to murder my lover. Try not to look back, it'll tip her off. Just walk straight into the place. What if you're not, what if dash? I'll be there 10 times faster than you. Go, before she reaches the lights, Twill hissed. She pushed me forward. I staggered, feet and legs resisting this insane plan. Then I put my head down, crossed my arms, and walked. The first part was the hardest, to the pedestrian crossing and over the road with the trickle of foot traffic, knowing that the skinhead girl would notice me at any moment. She'd see me in profile and recognize me, turn to follow, stalk me. The moment one comes under the eye of a watcher is always the worst. At least that's what I told myself, as I turned my back on her line of sight and walked up the high street. The pavement rose with a shallow incline, toward the cluster of roundabouts at the end of the high street. The shops thinned out and I took a left, exactly as Twill had told me, onto Grimmer Street. Fewer people here. Sad, leafless greenery wilted on a bank in the middle of the road. A multi-story car park loomed in the middle distance. A pub the Dog and Duck squatted another 100 paces ahead, tiny metal latticed windows looking out between black beamwork and red brick. I'd never seen the place before. I walked up to the faux rustic wooden door and pushed my way inside, over the scruffy old welcome mat and into the dark, warm interior, into the smell of stale beer and slate floor tiles. Shadows washed over me as my eyes adjusted to the dim lighting. I'd been into pubs with my parents a few times, when they dared take their unstable daughter out for the occasional nice meal of fish and chips, and I had vague memories of much happier meals with Maisie too, gastropub beer gardens in summer evenings in the South. The Dog and Duck was not a gastropub. It was rough and dingy and smelly, stained by decades of tobacco smoke and spilt beer. A couple of gray weathered old men propped up the bar, watching a football match. Twill sprang to her feet from the nearest table and grabbed my hand. How did you get here so fast? I asked. Ran, didn't I? She grinned, a touch smug. She behind you? I assume so. I didn't turn around to look. My shoulder blades itched. I stepped away from the door. Twill got the hint and hustled me deeper into the pub. The bloke behind the bar raised his eyebrows at us. You two want a drink, he called. We're waiting for a mate. Twill called back with a wink and a real laugh in her voice. Fair enough, the barman said. He wouldn't have been half as friendly if he knew what we were planning to do in his pub. Here, you sit there and watch the door, Twill said when we reached the booth table furthest in back. She hopped onto the opposite bench hard, uncomfortable wood and slid down so her head was below the level of the backrest. What are you doing? Twill rolled her eyes and smirked. I'm hidden, duh. She'll walk in, see you in the corner, and walk right up to you. Then I'll clock her one and drag her out the back. It's perfect. I lowered myself into the seat and pulled out my phone, hands still shaking and heart in my throat. My pulse was all over the place. The table stuck to my elbows, probably not cleaned in years. I need to call Rain. Yeah, good idea. Twill nodded. A figure stepped through pub's door and I almost jumped out of my seat and dropped my phone again. Black tar flesh and waving tentacles, I breathed out and rubbed at my chest, adrenaline strong enough to make my heart hurt. Tenny stalked halfway toward us and then circled the pub's tables, as if looking for the right angle to help me watch. The moment I'd jumped, Twill had peered over at the door. Now she frowned at me as if I was crazy. "What is your deal, anyway?" she said. "I never got to ask proper, before." "I can see spirits." "Like for real?" "For real," I echoed carefully, then sighed and tried to steady my breathing. My chest felt tight and my head hurt. "I'm not cut out for this." "You gonna call Rain or what?" Twill asked. Yes. "I'm going to be in enough trouble as it is without further delay." Twill frowned. "Trouble? With Rain?" I waved her down and focused on thumbing open my contact list. Pitifully few entries: my parents, Rain, Evelyn, the University Medical Center. "She giving you shit?" "What?" "She's treating you right, yeah. You and her are bumping uglies, aren't you?" "She's not like a shit, is she?" No, she's perfect." "I'm just an idiot, I dash." The skinhead girl walked into the dog and duck. To my surprise, I didn't jump this time. Some buried animal instinct of self-preservation told me to stay very quiet and very still, though I was sat right in her line of sight. "She there?" Twill hissed in a stage whisper. I nodded, cold sweat down my back, pulse racing in my throat. The skinhead girl glanced around the pub. Her gaze slid over me, uninterested. She nodded to the barman, walked over to him and spoke, dropping a few pound coins on the counter. He poured her a half pint and slid a packet of crisps toward her. "What's she doing?" Twill whispered. I swallowed, could I be wrong? "At the bar." "She's got a drink." Twill squinted in confusion. "You sure it's her?" I nodded. It was the woman who had shot at Rain, no mistake. Flint-eyed and cold-lipped, body like a marathon runner, all hard-corded muscle. She picked up her half-pint and turned toward me, eye contact at last. Her gaze asked a silent question, "Are you going to run?" Before I could say another word, Twill pulled herself up and leapt out of the booth, skidding across the tiled floor. The skinhead girl took a step back, surprised and wary but not shocked. Twill straightened up and growled. All eyes in the place. The barman and the two old men turned to look at Twill, startled and blinking. "Gotcha, slag!" Twill shouted at the top of her lungs. She grabbed a bar stool and swung it wide. The skinhead girl bowled her beer at Twill's head. Glass shattered, Twill howled, blood splattered across the floor and down her face, but it took more than a barroom glassing to slow Twill down. She wound up the bar stool and hurled it after the skinhead, who was already fleeing for the door. Twill slammed outside in pursuit before the stool had even finished clattering to the floor. The barman and the two regulars gaped after them. It was all over in seconds, so fast I couldn't react. Tenny flowed over to guard me like a faithful hound. I had to squeeze and bumble past her to get out, almost tripping over my feet with panic as I trotted for the door. "What the blazes was that about?" The barman called after me. "Hey, you need a hand, love? Want me to call the police?" "It's fine." I hiccuped as I pushed my way back outside into the Sherrowford afternoon. Twill was already 100 meters down the road, feet slamming the pavement, heading the opposite way from the high street. The skinhead girl slid out of sight ahead of her, ducking into an alleyway. "Twill!" I shouted, suddenly scared to be left alone, even though it was the middle of the day and the busy Sherrowford High Street was barely 2 minutes' walk away. A few pedestrians glanced at me, at the crazy shouting girl in the middle of the street, but Twill didn't look back. She chased the skinhead into the alleyway. I picked up my feet, a few hesitant fast steps, then a trot, then ran as best I could, clumsy and heavy-footed. Twill was so fast, there was no way the skinhead could escape. She'd catch her in that alleyway and then. And then what? The alleyway was empty except for some metal rubbish bins and back doors. Twill was already hurling herself out the other end. I called her name again, hoping any witnesses would ignore me as I slipped in after her. Seconds, minutes, no clue how long the chase took. After the first few heaving breaths I lost track of both time and my body, struggled to haul myself around these backstreet corners and across roads stuffed with parked cars. We plunged between iron-fenced industrial lots and dark moldering office spaces. I finally caught up with Twill as she was dropping down the other side of a tall spiked fence. The skinhead girl sprinted away from her, deeper inside the industrial property they'd both broken into. She ducked around a corner and vanished. No way I could follow in there. Twill! I shouted again and ran up to the fence, but she was off at top speed, bouncing around the corner after the skinhead. I caught a final flash of wolfish claw and wondered how she dare use her transformation out in public. In public? Heaving to catch my breath, lungs pumping like bellows, I turned on the spot. Red brick walls and dark windows stared down at me, damp pitted concrete spotted with lichen and moss, secluded from the world outside. A tangled conjunction of back alleys and abandoned buildings converged here in a wider space. Tenny padded up to me and stared. Apparently pneumosomatic life doesn't suffer the vulgarity of an overtaxed respiratory system, but other than her and a few spirits on the rooftops, I was utterly alone. And I had no idea where I was. Oh God. I put one hand on my aching chest and struggled to stay on my feet, reaching out blindly to grip the fence. Twill, you idiot. Tenny nosed in closer. I raised my eyebrows at her. You think I started, then froze. Running footsteps echoed down the tangle of alleyways, impossible to judge distance. Then a young man burst into the little makeshift back alley courtyard. He skidded to a halt at the sight of me, opened his mouth, and held up a hand. He didn't look threatening. Perhaps the same age as me. Perhaps a university student, with floppy hair and a compact build running to flab. Wait, he said, pointing a shaking finger at me. Wait right there, you, just wait right there. You're not supposed to be here. Yeah, that's right, you're in trouble. Just stay there. He spoke with a slight lisp. He held a phone up to his ear, call already connected. I've caught up to her, what do I do? Unathletic and permanently exhausted, with a supernatural bruise throbbing in my chest, out of breath and terrified, I found hidden reserves at the sound of those words. I picked a direction, any alleyway out of the tangle, and hurled myself away from the fence, away from this man. He grabbed a fistful of my coat. Physical struggle is difficult to control, unless one is trained, and trained well or like Rain. One becomes an animal, pure instinct and adrenaline, kicking, hissing, biting, clawing, even if one is naturally timid. Or you go limp, you can't believe it's happening to you, too shocked to react. Luckily, I turned out to be the former, but I barely recall the details. He stopped me, yanked me back. Didn't hit me, but tried to hold me still, pin my arms. I gave him a bad time of it, I think, went for his eyes and his throat without thinking. He seemed reluctant to hurt me, awkward and unsure of himself at first. Then he realized how much stronger he was than me, and started to laugh. Give it up, hey, he only wants to talk to you. I can't let you run off now, don't be stupid. Like this was all some big joke, as he grabbed my wrists and almost pulled me off my feet. I think I screamed, kicking and pushing and trying to get him off me. I landed a flailing knee between his legs. He let out a noise like a steam whistle and wasn't laughing anymore. He shoved me at the floor, sent me sprawling and pinned me down with a knee in my gut. He was shouting into his phone when Tenny stabbed him in the head. That I remember, very clearly. She reared up behind him like an angry squid, tentacles bunched and arced back for a strike. Relief filled me, before despair as I remembered she couldn't touch him, couldn't touch any flesh, she was literally bodiless. She jabbed all her tentacles together at once, spikes and stingers and suckers passing right through the back of his skull like the touch of a ghost. He jerked up and sneezed, shook his head. "What was that?" he blurted out. Tenny's distraction gave me the split second I needed to muster a reaction beyond the pure animal and to yank my arm free. I mashed my hand into his ugly, stupid face. His eyes went wide. Oh sure dash. Hyperdimensional math slotted into place, a spinning puzzle box in my mind, ratcheting spikes of pain behind my eyes. My stomach clenched, my body rebelled, but with my brain I gripped the black levers of reality and twisted them toward my own ends, along the angles of extradimensional physics. The man vanished. Instantly I rolled over and vomited, spewed my guts across the concrete and felt a nosebleed run down my face, coughing and spluttering. My chest was on fire and my head pounded like an expanding ring of red-hot steel lay beneath the surface of my skull. No time to whine, no time for pain. With more effort than I'd thought myself capable of, I struggled to my knees, then to my feet. Retching and staggering, I wiped my bleeding nose on my sleeve. My hands shook, my chest shook, everything shook. I spat vomit-flavored saliva onto the floor. Over everything, absurdly, I felt terrible about my new pink hoodie getting spotted with stomach acid and flecked with blood. My vision throbbed, edged with black, and I had to keep squeezing my eyes shut. Tenny stared at me like a concerned dog. "It's okay," I mumbled through numb lips. It'll be okay." I fumbled my phone out more by touch than sight, and curled up around my aching chest as I listened to the ring. "Heather." The sound of Rain's voice down the phone almost made me sob. "Hey, you heading home?" "Everything dash." "Rain," I whined her name, couldn't stop myself. "I need help." I snorted back the nosebleed, then staggered as weakness gripped my knees. Had to hold myself against the wall. "Heather." "What happened?" "Heather." I'm okay now, I'm okay." "I had to. I think I killed a man. Come get me, Rain. Please." "Where are you?" "Where are you exactly, right now?" Twill showed up." It's not her fault." "It's not." I dash. A hand plucked my phone from shaking fingers. Barely needed to fight me for it. I turned and gaped, so racked with pain and nausea that I hadn't even heard the footsteps approach. Rain's voice, tinny and distorted, was carried away from me. The skinhead girl pressed the end call button. She took a step back, away from me, beyond arm's reach. We stared at each other, me bloody-nosed and wide-eyed, her cold and dispassionate. "Heather Lavinia Morel," she said. "My boss wants a word with you." My phone buzzed in the skinhead's hand. Rain calling back. She took her eyes off me without much concern, rejected the call, and held down the off button. Perhaps she knew I couldn't run. My knees shook, my guts roiled, my head throbbed with pain in rhythm with my heartbeat. If I moved too fast I'd double over and vomit again. "Gee, give me that back," I croaked. She fixed me with a cold gaze again. Nothing behind her eyes. "Catch." I caught the phone, a miracle I didn't fumble and drop it on the concrete. I gripped it to my chest and stared at the skinhead. She kept her hands free, by her sides, rather than tucked away in her raincoat pockets, or in the gray athletic top she wore underneath. Tacky tattoos peeked out from her neckline, Chinese dragons and bat wings and tribal swirls. Older than me, maybe late 20s, or perhaps prematurely weathered by hard living and bad luck. Even through the pounding in my head and the aftertaste of bile in my throat, senses dulled and brain math aftershock, she radiated danger. I felt it in my gut, an animal response to the thousand subtleties of musculature and poise. A dark twin to the way Rain looked in the moments before violence. "Don't turn that back on," she said softly. "Why not?" I managed to sound a lot more brave than I felt. She didn't answer. Tenny had been content to hover next to me, her tentacles waving lazily in the air, no help at all, but now she began to creep across the pitted asphalt, on a trajectory to circle around behind the skinhead. My eyes flicked to her back. She'd stabbed that man in the head, hadn't she? No time to process what that feat implied, but I swallowed and prayed all the same. If she could land another distraction, maybe I could gather myself and run. I needed time to recover. I'd just fall flat on my face. The skinhead followed my gaze, peered around and saw nothing, then glanced back at me with a tight professional frown. "Right," she said, and took a step back. Her body language blinked from passive threat to sudden motion. I flinched hard, coughed bile and blood in surprise. She reached into her raincoat and whipped out a small metal cylinder, shiny machine steel stamped with symbols that made my eyes hurt. A plug of black wax capped one end. She held it out at arm's length, pointing into open space, and dug her thumb into the wax seal. A gap in the air poured from the end of the cylinder, like uncorking a bottle under pressure. A scribble, a tear in paper over an abyss, expanding as it unfolded itself from inside the tiny metal prison. Twitching and shaking, it stood up. 9 feet tall, knot-faced, knife-point legs and arms waving like seaweed in an invisible current. The scribble monster. The thing that had been stalking Rain on the morning we met. No, this one was smaller, slightly. And far more purposeful. No orders needed, it folded itself in the middle like a length of intestine and jerked toward Tenny. "No!" I shouted, fumbling with my left sleeve to expose the fractal, to make the scribble thing go away. I needn't have bothered, Tenny burst open. It was one of the most violent and disgusting things I'd ever seen a spirit do. Also incomprehensible. For a moment I thought she'd died, that the scribble monster had reached out with some invisible power and ruptured her like overripe fruit. But the process didn't end, it grew and so did Tenny. Her tar flesh boiled and bubbled over, iridescent globes growing on each other, popping and roiling, limbs and tentacles and eyes and mouths growing and dissolving at blinding speed in the protoplasmic mass. Thick chemical stench and a wave of biological heat washed over my face, made me squint and gag. The transformation ended, quick-drying putty pulled to a new shape. No longer a flat, lithe approximation of a human female, Tenny reared up as a chimera the size of a car, a dozen different animals melded together in tarry black imitation flesh, from snake tail to lion head, eagle wings and goat horns, a mantle of tentacles lashing above her. Tenny and the scribble monster slammed into each other, slicing and biting, tentacles whipping and stabbing. It tore great slopping holes in her flesh, which closed with the slow, slick motion of cold tar. She ripped chunks from its limbs, sending them spinning and fading to ash in the air. I shrank back and swallowed a scream, wincing and squeezing my eyes shut as they rolled together, 2 giant creatures tearing into each other feet away from me. Long-buried primal instincts made me want to hide, probably up a tree. The skinhead didn't react even when the pneumosomatic fight rolled straight through her. She couldn't see them. Wide-eyed, hands over my mouth, I watched in sickening despair as the scribble monster drew Tenny away. She kept trying to circle back to me, but it threatened her at every turn, herded her down one of the alleyways leading out of this secluded tangle, until I lost sight of them. Rending and ripping sounds echoed down the pathways of the concrete jungle, the only evidence they were still hacking at each other. "That's taken care of your little helper, hasn't it?" the skinhead asked, her voice too soft for her face. Hands numb, I groped for the personal attack alarm still in my pocket. I held it up, thumb on the button. Somebody will hear. "We're not in the wilderness, this is the middle of Sherrowford." She nodded slowly, utterly unmoved. "Let me give you a piece of advice," she said. "I'm the gentle touch. The good cop. The carrot. What? Your best option right now is to come with me, have a friendly little chat with the boss in a public place. Nothing else is gonna happen." She inclined her head at the alarm in my shaking hand. "Or you press that button. You'll get away today, sure. But he won't be sending the gentle touch next time. You'll get the bad cop. We know where you live, we know your daily routine. My boss will send the big stick to rip your front door off in the middle of the night, and the little chat won't be in a nice public place. Or very friendly. A bluff? Even with all my faculties about me, I wouldn't have been able to read her. I felt like hell, ready to vomit again, more from fear than from the aftereffects of brain math. I wanted to curl up around my chest and lie very still for several hours. I can zap you into another dimension, I said. You dash. I know that. I'm not going to risk touching you. I'm not stupid. She made a show of glancing about. I see Jake's missing. His fault for not following instructions. Shouldn't have tried to rough you up. No hard feelings, yeah. What happened to Twill? I asked. The skinhead smiled, thin and dangerous. The expression failed to reach her eyes. The Brinkwood werewolf? She's not as good a hunter as she thinks. She's not coming to help you. I swallowed and tried very hard not to believe her. A public place. Food court in the shopping center. Public place, like I said, for a little talk. At the very least, I had to stall for time. Rain knew I was in trouble. She'd have a hell of a job finding me crammed in this back alley. The shopping center was in full public view. And the more I moved around, the better chance of Twill catching my scent. I nodded and levered myself up off the wall. Oh, okay. But if you try anything, I'll grab you and dash. A wave of dizziness passed over me. I snorted back, more nosebleed, coughing and spitting crimson bile onto the floor. The skinhead extracted a packet of tissues from a pocket and tossed them at me. Clean yourself up. She wasn't a liar, at the very least. The skinhead led me back to the high street and down the road, to the glass-and-chrome entrance to Sherrowford's only shopping center, the unimaginatively named Swanbrook Mall. Fake marble floors and shiny open shop fronts, and this time of day clumps of teenagers hanging about, for want of anything else to do. She maintained a safe distance from my side, beyond arm's length, so I wouldn't be able to lunge and grab her, send her spinning off into the horror of a trip outside. Not that I could have lunged or leapt. Every scrap of my energy was consumed in putting one foot in front of the other. Adrenaline and willpower held my body upright, knees weak, head still pounding, the taste of vomit in my mouth. I'd wiped the worst of the blood from my face. Nobody gave me a second look, a depressive college girl with her arms crossed and her head down. I knew I could have refused, stood still and not walked another step. Public place, she couldn't do anything. But then we'd lose her boss, and they'd come for us in the middle of the night, and that time I might not be fast enough or well enough or in the right place at the right time. I snuck glances over my shoulder, hoping and praying that Twill would find me again, or Rain would come around a corner and save me, or even that Tenny would roll up, disgusting tentacle mass and all. We took the escalators up through the shopping center, past clothing shops and half-empty music stores, gaudy kiosk stands and glitzy displays. I'd always hated malls. Crass, consumptive, pointless modernity. Anonymous, bland, meaningless. I could think of no better place to meet such horrible people. We emerged onto the top floor, the food court, strangely empty for this time of day. A few tables were semi-occupied near the most popular fast food places, but most of it lay empty and open, echoing and bright beneath the huge glass skylight roof, ceiling crisscrossed with metal supports, exterior covered in bird droppings and green scum. The skinhead stepped past me without a word, and made for the back of the food court, a dead end with a trio of shuttered and failed food outlets. At first I didn't follow, so she stopped and stared at me. "We're almost there," she said. "No sense in turning back now." I nodded and followed, and told myself I could run whenever I wanted. A lie, I could barely walk. The last store in the dead-end row was a fancy coffee shop, named Luskoff, according to the shiny yet unlit sign above. It was closed, metal security shutter 3/4 down, the inside mothballed and emptied and left to gather dust, chairs stacked on tables, containers and racks empty behind the counter. The lights were on, a lone table cleared and wiped clean, chairs laid out. A single steaming cup of coffee stood at the edge of the table. 2 people waited inside. One was the tall woman in the trench coat, wrapped from head to toe like before. Only her eyes showed. She lounged in an empty booth, spread out and relaxed, feet up on the table, so tall she didn't fit properly. She didn't bother to look at us, lost in some private place behind those dead eyes, or perhaps incapable of independent thought. The other person met my eyes and smiled. "Please, do come in," he said. "There's plenty of free seating." The misplaced librarian. The young man from the standoff in the underground car park. He sat at the clean table, hands folded before him. My unwanted skinhead companion lifted the metal security gate up by a couple of feet, then nodded to me. "Inside. Duck under." I hesitated, this was rapidly becoming very much not a public place. "There is nothing to be afraid of," the man said, pleasant and reasonable, the voice of a junior professor or a good psychiatrist. "Miss Stack should have taken the time to explain that to you. Did you not do so, Amy?" "I did," the skinhead said. "Then there is no problem. You will come in. You will sit down." The skinhead Amy Stack, he'd called her, glanced back the way we'd walked. With a spark of hope in my chest, I followed her gaze, but nobody was there. No Twill. No Rain. No Tenny. "Best not to keep him waiting," she muttered, so only I could hear. I blinked at her. "Get inside," she said out loud. I did as I was told, ducked down and straight up again inside the half-empty coffee shop. The motion and effort made my head throb and my vision swim. Stack followed me and pushed the security gate back down, almost to the floor. The librarian gestured to a seat opposite his own. "Please. You will sit." Heart in my throat, hands numb, almost unable to move my feet, I walked across the coffee shop and steadied myself on the back of the chair. "Don't move the chair," said Stack. "Just sit down." The librarian tooted. Amy, your concern for me is most laudable, but I hardly think it's warranted. This is no interrogation, or unpleasant confrontation. We are merely having a nice little afternoon chat. You're not immune, sir." I realized what she meant. The chair intended for me was placed at the limit of lunging range, grabbing range. A safe distance from my power to send him outside. A battered spark of confidence sputtered to life, and forced back the fear and violation. They were cautious of me. They knew what I could do to them. But they didn't know I was spent. One defensive brain math use was about my limit, as I was rapidly discovering from how weak and shaky I felt, how ready to curl up and sleep. I could send him outside, but I'd probably pass out or choke on my own sick afterwards. Or his minions would carry me off. Or just kill me. "Please. You will sit," said the librarian. I lowered myself into the chair, smoothed my coat over my knees, and tried to control my breathing, control the terror. I risked a side glance at the tall woman in the trench coat, her huge, powerful body at rest like a predatory big cat. She tried to kill Rain too, but right now I felt no pressing need to confront her. Stack took up station by the security shutter, hands behind her back. "Amy," the librarian said. "Where has Jake gotten himself to?" "He got handsy with her. Was gone by the time I got there." "Ah." The librarian turned to me. "I shall assume he is beyond punishment." I nodded once, tried to make myself seem cold and uncaring. I had zero time right now to think about how I'd probably killed that man. "I hold you no ill will for that," he said. "Jake was merely a first-stage initiate, of little importance. My subordinates should know better than to have manhandled you." He turned back to Amy with an indulgent smile. "You took longer than expected. Ran into the werewolf. Sent her off chasing her own tail. Had to pop the Geist as well. Amy nodded toward me. She was protected, up close. Really now? How fascinating, the librarian said as he looked at me. In time I absolutely must hear all about it, all the little details, but first coffee. I have taken the liberty of selecting a brew for you. I believe I know your tastes. I eyed the steaming cup on the edge of the table and folded my arms across my chest. Sitting straight was very difficult, my chest hurt so badly, but I forced myself to stay upright. No, thank you. Oh, you think we've drugged it? Very smart. Very sensible. I just stared at him. You do not know my name, he said. His expression burst into a smile of genuine delight and pleasure. His face was shiny, young, chin perfectly shaved, his head of tousled blonde hair thick and recently cut. Dressed in a suit with patched elbows, waistcoat and tie, a long coat lay over the back of a nearby booth. He fussed with one of his shirt cuffs as he smiled at me. He made me feel sick. I wondered if this was what Rain would call a punchable face. I had the distinct impression I recognized him, but I couldn't work out why. Heather Lavinia Morell. 19 years old, almost 20, he said. Born on the 17th of January. Parents' names are Samantha and Gregory. Your father is a minor engineer for Network Rail. Your mother is a bank clerk. You have no siblings and no other close family to speak of, though you briefly knew your maternal grandfather before he died of a heart attack when you were 6. You spent 3 years in and out of Signet Children's Hospital in London between the ages of 10 and 13, but you did attend school, and went on to complete your A-levels 1A and 2BS and are now a student of English literature, at our fine university here in Sherrowford. He smiled as he went, satisfied and sickly warm. A cold hand of violation crept up my back. How do you know all that? I murmured. Knowledge is open to any who know how to ask. Was I correct? I was, wasn't I? I do so love to be correct, I dash. He cut off and blinked once. He was wrong about one thing, I was not only child. I clutched Maisie to my chest, to my secret heart, and loved her all the more. How can I be wrong? He demanded. His good humor crumbled into confusion. How can I wrong about even a shred of that? Which fact was incorrect? You will tell me. I shook my head. No. You will tell me. A tug in the forefront of my brain. My mouth opened. I have a dash, I bit down and winced, blinking at him in shock. Ah, you resist. You would be good at that, yes. Skilled, perhaps. I have misplayed my hand. He sat back, jovial and warm once more. Very well, you have scored a point, and it is to my shame. My name is Alexander Lilburn, and my business is the total liberation of the human mind. He paused, as if expecting a response. I gave him none. Now, if you would be so kind, Alexander continued. Please inform me as to which aspect of your life I have catalogued incorrectly. I am so maddened by inconsistency, you see. We cannot get down to business before such matters are cleared up and I have you placed firmly in your correct context. Stuff your context, I managed. He smiled and laughed, a soft, blubbery sound. Now, there is no need for that. I am not going to do anything nefarious with your secrets. I have no need for blackmail, and you have nothing worth taking. I dash. You don't know anything about me, I hissed. I'm not an only child. I have a twin. And you can't have her name. Alexander frowned, deeply puzzled. You do not. A lie. Why lie to me? It's not a lie. I almost shouted. I wanted to hit him. I'd never wanted to hit anybody before. No, I can see that, it is merely a truth you believe. But the records do not attest to a sister, let alone a twin. He sighed and spread his hands. I do so detest dealing with the mentally ill. I'm not ill. Go to hell. I probably shall, but not for many years yet. Let us agree that you believe you have a sister, and leave it at that. I glowered at him, my fear almost overrun with hate, almost able to forget how much danger I was in. He dredged up the one thing I'd protect above all others. Now, let us move to far more intriguing personal matters. Lavinia. Lavinia. He rolled his tongue over my middle name, savored the sound. My skin crawled. Do you ever go by your middle name, Lavinia? You should consider doing so. It is a saint's name, among what passes for the world of secret truths. The name of a saint and martyr, though ancient history now, and completely unrelated to you or us. I wonder if your parents knew. Doubtful, of course. I had to keep stalling, but every word he spoke deepened my detest. He liked the sound of his own voice. I swallowed and forced myself not to grit my teeth. What do you want? My voice came out tighter and harder than I'd intended. Alexander laughed again, that deep, rubbery sound. Oh, but that is not the question, that is not the question at all, Lavinia. The question is, what do you want? He opened a hand toward me and waited, invited an answer. A rhetorical trap. I could take an educated guess at his thought process, and it made me angry. He sat there assured that he knew everything, in a secluded, private place with a naive and terrified 19-year-old girl he was about to browbeat and talk over. My next line was obvious, I want you to leave me alone, I want to go home, and so on. I refused to snatch the bait. £1,000,000, I hissed. Alexander blinked, then smiled that sickening smile an inch wider. Is that your price, Lavinia? Do not undervalue yourself. On the other hand, if that is a serious answer, I believe we can come to an agreement of cash payment. What do you mean? I frowned at him, off balance. You see, you are a unique thing. He spread his hands. Or at least very close to unique. I personally know of only one other person in the entire world capable of doing as you do, of operating reality with your mind, but she is unfortunately far beyond the event horizon of her own sanity. Quite apart from your potential value to my organization, I wish to understand, in every part and every way, how you do what do you. We are willing to pay any price, fulfill any desire, to have you join us. Name it, please. Name your price, Lavinia. Another person capable of, another person who could do what I do. Another brain math savant. Another victim of the eye. I opened my mouth, but I would not speak Maisie's name to this man. Please, Lavinia, don't concern yourself with that. My younger sister is much like you, but not with your clarity of mind and dash. He went on talking. Not Maisie. Nothing to do with Maisie. And I am serious when I say name your price. Let us open negotiations, see what we can do for you. He disgusted me. You people tried to kill Rain. I glanced at Stack. Alexander raised his eyebrows in polite interest. Who? My. Say's minion, Stack supplied quietly. Ah, yes, the Say family. You've been spending your time with the daughter, associating with her in public, visiting that sad old house. Learning from her too, no doubt. Evelyn is her name, I believe, but that is a fact not worth knowing. Now, her mother, I knew her mother very briefly. Brilliant woman. Her death was a terrible loss to our world. Rain is not Evelyn's minion, I said. She's her friend. And my girlfriend. I glanced again at Amy Stack, let her see what was written beneath my face. If being scared was useless, I may as well hate. She frowned ever so slightly, as if she'd begun to work out what I meant. You should hardly be wasting your incredible potential on the Say girl, Alexander continued. However pitiful and sympathetic her condition has rendered her, she can do nothing for you. She is at best a dabbler, running a what did my uncle call it, Amy? He used such a colorful phrase. A Mickey Mouse operation, sir. Yes. Alexander slapped his knee in delight, as if this was a hilarious joke. A Mickey Mouse operation, indeed. The old man has it in him yet, not quite all spent. Unlike Miss Evelyn say. Stop dash, I bit back, as much from the throbbing pain in my chest as from fear. Alexander waited for me to continue. I had to take a deep breath. Stop insulting my friends. Insulting? He frowned gently, pursed his lips as if talking to a naughty child, and shook his head. You misunderstand. I am merely offering objective critique of her situation and by extension, yours. Say can offer you what exactly? A bed under her dubious roof. Some musty old books. I, on the other hand, am here to offer you and your unique talent a place in an organization with a future, with human liberation at its core. I, my uncle, and a few other like-minded sages, have embarked on the greatest project in human history. I need brilliant minds and shining talents, and I am asking you to name your price, Lavinia. Stop calling me that, I snapped. He smiled and opened a hand toward me, so very reasonable. Everybody has a price, secret desires even I cannot divine. You must tell me. See what we can do for you. Money? We have money, more than you can imagine what to do with, I'd think. Enough to solve any lifelong problem. We can give you power, of various sorts. Knowledge of magic, magic itself. Sex. I take it you are some kind of sexual deviant. He smiled a horrible rubbery smile. A willing, pliant partner, multiples of such, if dash. The only thing I want is my sister back. Alexander sighed. His smile collapsed into dull unimpressed boredom. An impossibility. You never had a sister dash. I do. Be reasonable now. Try to understand the magnitude of the offer I am making. We can do almost anything to satisfy your desires, and this is not an offer we extend to many. Ask Amy there. Amy, do tell Lavinia why you are with us, what we offered you. Stack the ice-cold skinhead hesitated. Sir, do you really dash? You will tell her. She sighed. Purpose. That's all they gave me. All we gave you, Alexander echoed. Behind his amused smile lay power offended. Indeed. So you see, Lavinia, we offer you so much more. A strong suspicion entered my mind, I was not getting out of here, he would not take no for an answer. I'd never before encountered a person so comfortable in the position and appearance of power, but I knew exactly what he was, because I'd encountered plenty of things like him that weren't people. This was exactly like being outside, like a slip. I had to stall and hide, wait with my breath held in perfect stillness, behind an outcropping of rock, for the gaze of some vast intelligence to grow bored and turn away from me. I hid. I drew myself up in my seat and raised my chin, put on all the airs and mannerisms of Evelyn at her most offended and self-righteous. The effort was staggering, to ignore the creaking aches and pains in my racked body, the swimming vision, the throbbing head. I unfolded my arms, opened up that last line of physical defense. I tapped my knee with one hand as I let the other wander to my chin, an ostentatious display of thought. How I pulled it off, I don't know. Fear, adrenaline, the needs of the moment. Or perhaps my friends had rubbed off on me enough that I felt the tiniest sliver of what I pretended. Who is we? I asked. Alexander raised his eyebrows and opened his mouth, but I had to really sell this, put on a show. I'm being offered a job, basically. I spoke before he could, and kept most of the quiver out of my voice, screaming inside. I'd like to know who I'd be working for. You're cultists, right? The Sherrowford cult. Cult. What a quaint word. I'm afraid Miss Evelyn Say has been reading too much of Mr. Lovecraft. The real world does not offer us such simple and neat definitions. Are we a cult, Amy? Most certainly, sir. Well, there you have it, we are a cult. From the horse's mouth. I much prefer to think of us as a sort of practical research group, plumbing unseen depths. Stack cleared her throat gently. Brotherhood of the New Sun. I committed his every word to memory, because I was going to help Evelyn kill this man. Keep hiding, keep hiding. Hasn't Evelyn been giving you a run for your money? I said. She's been messing up your closed-loop spaces and invading your Shadowside city. She's going to stamp you out soon enough. She's set on killing you all. I think she will. Alexander chuckled and waved a hand in dismissal. Say has been making her problems our problems, I will admit. It's such a parasitic way to live. But no, her efforts have been totally useless. Nibbling away at the edges, really? She has no idea of the kind of work we're doing and she's not even close to disrupting us. And what is it you've been doing in Sherrowford, with these closed-loop spaces? Ah. Ah. Alex smiled broad and warm, waved a finger and tooted. I didn't like the look of that at all. My stomach clenched up. I see what you are up to, Lavinia. Very clever, but you are dealing with an adult here. You have to make a commitment before such details can be shared. I dash. And if you are that eager, perhaps a one-way tour of our work is in order. There are such sights, waiting just on the other side of the air itself. He waved a slow hand above the table, then gestured to Stack. Amy, I do believe our guest is going to come with us. Prepare the entryway, if you would be so kind. And make sure that thing is awake. He nodded at the tall woman in the trench coat and then smiled at me again. We have been building quite a project. You are going to have contributions to make. I'd gone too far. Time to leave. Time to slip. My heart hammered in my throat and my stomach rebelled at the mere thought, but it was the only option I had left. I'd been preparing myself this entire time, in the back of my mind where I didn't have to look at what I had to do. A gamble, yes, that I'd be spat out somewhere I could be safely unconscious in a pool of my own blood and sick for hours, but slipping on purpose was better than being kidnapped by insane cultists led by a cut-rate Patrick Bateman wannabe. The first layer of impossible math slid into place in my mind. I winced. A black tarry figure stepped into my peripheral vision, in front of the coffee shop and then straight through the metal security gate. My heart lit up. I slammed the math to a halt. Tenny. I forced myself not to look at her, not to give the game away as she stepped across the half-empty coffee shop, around the stacked chairs, tentacles waving in the air like a halo of tar. She was back to normal size, vaguely humanoid once more. Nobody else could see her, but if she could just. The tall woman sat bolt upright and stared right at Tenny. Zheng. Alexander snapped. What is it? Zheng did not answer. She stared like a pointer dog, then turned with robotic slowness, to regard Alexander with her dead eyes. Stack backed up from the security shutter, suddenly alert and tense. It's her Geist again, I think. Ours couldn't do for it. There's nothing there, I said. I made a show of glancing around, but my carefully constructed front fell away at the prospect of help. My hands were shaking, my throat tight. Tenny was not whole, the fight with the servitor had taken great chunks out of her tar flesh, rough wounds, the edges reaching toward each other in a struggling effort to close. Several tentacles had been torn off or severed, stumps waggling in the air and dripping ichor. She stared at me and stalked closer. Zheng, Alexander repeated, harsh and angry, going red in the face. Answer me. Zheng just stared. He snapped off a series of hard, guttural words, some ear-aching non-human language. Small. Unimportant, Zheng said from behind the scarf wrapped around her face. Her voice was like granite. Get rid of it then. Alexander made a shooing motion with one hand. Throw it outside. Jing rose to her feet, mechanical and slow. A horrible sight, to watch so much muscle and tendon in motion. She was a giant, she could pull a human limb from limb, and I didn't need to see a demonstration to know that. To be so close was to be in the presence of death. She didn't need to expose more than her eyes to prove that. Stack shrank back too, impossible to resist the intimidation. But dash, I said. Jing rounded on Tenny and grabbed her by the throat, living flesh touching pneumosomatic life. No. I cried out. Tenny writhed and jerked, as surprised as I was, kicking as Jing lifted her bodily off the floor. Her tentacles lashed, battering at Zheng's head and shoulders, rearing back to strike and bouncing off. Tenny made no sound but Zheng rumbled like a rock slide in her throat. Laughter or a growl, I couldn't tell. Throw it outside, Zheng, don't play with your food, Alexander said. No, you can't. You dash. Found you, came a whisper of snowflakes on winter wind. All eyes except perhaps Tenny's snapped to the front of the coffee shop. Preem stood in front of the metal security shutter. Preem 1 or 2, I couldn't tell, because Evelyn had changed her clothes again, into a practical windbreaker and a pair of jeans, ice blue hair tucked up out of the way in a ponytail. She stared straight ahead with those blank white eyes. Naughty puppies, she said. My heart leapt. What is that? Who is that? Alexander said, standing up, and raising a curious eyebrow at Evelyn's wooden demon host. Zheng had half-lowered Tenny, who was still scratching and flailing at her side. Preem continued her perfect refrain. Huff and puff and blow your house down. She wrapped one hand worth of ice blue fingers around the security shutter. It's locked, Stack said to her. You can't get in. Go away, this is a private dash. Preem pulled upward. Metal snapped and bent and the locking mechanism gave way with a tortured screech. The security shutter rolled upward. I hurtled out of my chair so fast I thought I'd snapped a rib, my chest wrenched so badly inside, heaving with the effort of pushing my shaking carcass at sudden speed. I slipped and skidded and cracked my hip off a table. Amy reached for me, braced for a tackle. I stuck out a hand toward her, my intent plain, enough to make her hesitate. Preem took a step inside the coffee shop, coming to meet me halfway. Zheng, hold her still, Alexander said in a bored drawl. Zheng dropped Tenny and came for me. 1 second of being chased by that giant of a woman almost made me lose control of my bowels. A screaming animal fear gripped every cell in my body. I stumbled back and tripped over a chair, sprawled and cracked my head off the ground, scrambling away and choking down a scream. She was too big as she loomed closer, too fast as she leapt a table, too strong as she rounded on me. Preem was strong, she was a demon, she was under Evelyn's remote command, but this monster was beyond anything I'd seen this side of reality. She reached down toward me with one gloved hand. Why wasn't Preem helping? I cringed back, following an instinct to make myself small, curl up into a ball, hide, go away, go away. Zheng's head snapped up. She snatched her hand back. Jerked away. Too slow. Wolves are generally not ambush predators, but Twill made it work. From her hiding place just around the corner of the coffee shop entrance, Twill exploded like a cannonball. She kicked Zheng in the face with enough force to shatter steel. The giant zombie woman went flying, crashed into tables and tumbled over the back of a booth. She landed with a splinter of breaking wood, in a tangle of limbs and chairs, face down. Zheng did not stay down. No living thing should have moved again after that kick to the face. I was clutching at the pain inside my chest, struggling and slipping to get my feet underneath me when her arm twitched. One hand jerked up from the pile of splintered furniture, and grabbed the back of a booth. Surely her face would be pulped, I thought, bones shattered inward and eye sockets pulverized, jaw broken and teeth lost. She was just a puppet, right? The only reason she still moved was her strings. The zombie heaved herself to her knees and raised her head. Not even bruised. Twill's kick had twisted her scarf, now scuffed with boot print, and finally knocked down her hood, to reveal a mop of greasy dark hair. She stared past me, dead eyes boring into Twill. "Come on, up, get up," Twill grunted. She dragged me to my feet, hands under my armpits. I staggered and clung to her, gasping for breath as my head swirled. Preem took a step in front of us, her pose still perfectly prim and proper. Tenny, dripping black tar from her wounds, scrambled up and over to my side, jabbing a few afterthought tentacles at both Zheng and Stack, touching neither. "Ah!" Alexander smiled with the satisfaction of a man who knows he will always win in the end. He opened a hand to Twill. "The bestial provincial. Have you come for a rematch, perhaps? I think you will find us all amply prepared this time. Zheng, if you please, put this thing out of its misery at last." Zheng did not move. "Zheng." Alexander clicked his fingers at her. She turned her head to him. Blinked once. "Pay attention when I speak to you." "Boss," Stack raised her voice, sharp and quick. That made a lot of noise. "This isn't the strip, we're in public. We need to dash." Preem walked smartly over to the wall, raised one precise finger, and pressed the regulation-mandated fire alarm button, set in its neat square of red plastic. A deafening siren wail burst across the entire shopping center for 3 seconds, deep and echoing and electronic, then cut out, replaced by a smart female voice booming over the mall's public address speakers. "Attention please. Attention please. This is a fire alert. Please make your way calmly to the ground floor exits." Sirens thundered for another 3 seconds, then the recorded message again, on a loop. Twill stuck 2 fingers up at Alexander, howling laughter over the din of the fire alarm. He ignored her, barking words at Zheng, no response from her except that dead-eyed stare. "Boss," Stack said. "We need to leave." Alexander's surface irritation dissolved into a bored shrug. He nodded at Stack and gestured vaguely toward us. She frowned at him, frowned at Twill and I, then frowned at Preem as the bound demon put herself directly in the way. Stack nodded once, body language shifting. She reached inside her raincoat and produced another cylinder, very much like the one she'd used to summon the servitor, cold metal stamped with painful symbols. She feinted to Preem's left, then ducked right, her arm arcing out to touch Preem with the cylinder. Even flush with adrenaline and clinging to Twill and deafened by the alarm, I could make an educated guess what might happen to Preem if that device made contact. I tried to cry a warning, but choked on my own spit, spluttering and coughing. I needn't have bothered. Preem caught Stack's forearm as it came, one hand on wrist, one hand on elbow. Stack's eyes wide went for a split second as she began to pull away, to twist into some judo throw that would send Preem flying. Without apparent effort, Preem snapped the woman's arm. Stack didn't scream, but otherwise the transformation was instant. She gasped, her face drained of color, waxy and ashen. The metal cylinder with the horrible symbols clattered to the floor. Preem let go and backed quickly away, toward us. Stack crumpled up around her broken forearm, half of it pointing the wrong way, the wrong angle. She tried to touch it, sinking to her knees, squeezing her eyes shut and gasping in tightly controlled pain. Alexander watched us go, an unimpressed curl to his lips. Twill flipped him off again on the way out. Zheng was still staring at her master. Dead eyes bored into his back. Extracting me from Swanbrook Mall turned into a debacle all by itself, even without the cultists and the giant zombie woman and the random acts of grievous bodily harm. Despite being barely half full, the shopping center turned into a shoulder-to-shoulder scrum, people trying to get out. The fictional fire and the bleeding alarm whipped the crowd into one heaving mass, a single panicked beast with thousands of limbs. Staying on my feet took every ounce of effort I had left, let alone fighting the weakness in my knees or the throbbing pain in my head. 'Twill all but drag me as I clung to her, and once we made it out of the food court the flow of people threatened to pull us apart, two shorter than average teenage girls crushed and buffeted by the press of bodies. Preem vanished somewhere in the melee, lost ahead or behind us, and we didn't find her again until we tumbled out of the ground floor exit onto Sherrowford's main high street. Half the road had stopped to gawk, traffic at a crawl, blocked by a fire engine parked across the pavement. Shopping center staff and a fire crew and a couple of uniformed policemen directed people out of the building, counting shop worker heads. People were crying, some lads were laughing it all off, several others filmed the spectacle on their phones. I had to stop to be sick on the pavement. Twill and I had no trouble slipping away in the general mayhem. Nobody missed two teenage girls, one obviously overstimulated by panic, in need of a proper sit-down for her hysterics. Occasionally, stereotypes can work in our favor. Tenny caught up with us shortly after Preem, ghosting out of an alleyway as we turned the corner at the top of the high street. I flinched as she appeared, not exactly difficult to startle right now. She waved her tentacles at me in a back-and-forth fan pattern, laughter or relief, or a victory dance. I had no spare energy to think. I managed a nod of thanks at her, and hoped she'd understand somewhere inside that alien mind. None of us said anything until we cleared the cluster of roundabouts, passed the little red brick industrial district, and found ourselves halfway down one of Sherrowford's pitiful attempts at leafy suburb. Language, I squeezed out, then winced and curled up around my chest. What? Oh, yeah, sorry. Swear like a sailor sometimes. My mum's always telling me off for it too. Twill smiled awkwardly and then drew us to a halt. Bloody hell, you're really messed up, aren't you? They didn't make you take something, did they? She adjusted her supporting arm under my shoulders. Preem stopped too, but turned her head to stare back the way we'd walked, at the few other pedestrians visible at the end of the road. We'd left the chaos of the high street far behind. I shook my head. This is just, it's just me. I did this. Special head magic. I felt a wave of nausea and bent forward to retch, stomach muscles clenching but bringing up nothing. I coughed and forced myself straight again. Thank you, Twill, thank you. You came back. Thank you. Ah, it's nothing, I dash. We must keep moving, Preem said. She raised a hand and pointed. Zheng stood in the shadow of the last house in the row, hands in pockets, hood up, staring at us. Tenny shrank back and sheltered behind me, as if I offered any protection whatsoever. Twill rumbled a growl deep in her throat, a sound to make me cringe and shy away. Twill was on my side, no doubt, but that did not disarm her unsettling nature. I'll have her, I swear, I'll have her right now. Not in the open, Preem said, her voice empty of inflection. You carry Heather. Do not put her down. Yeah, I got it. Stick to the plan, blah blah. Twill grimaced, then snuck a wink at me. Don't worry, I won't drop you. I'll be good. We walked the entire way. I was ready to curl up and die, right there on the pavement. As soon as Twill let go, I was going to collapse and expire from exhaustion. I kept pulling her to a halt so I could catch my breath, close my eyes as the waves of nausea and muscle spasm passed through me. We stopped by a corner shop so I could spit bile into the nearby rubbish bin. Zheng followed us without moving. We never saw her walking, trailing us, stalking us down the suburban streets and through the connecting alleyways. She'd be already stood in the shade of a shuttered shop front on the other side of the road, or waiting in statue stillness at the far end of a street. She vanished for long minutes at a time, long enough to let us think she'd given up, when one of us, mostly Twill, with me so focused on my pain, would spot her. Along the black wrought iron fence which marked the boundary of Austin Park, down the long hill which connected to Abbott's Lane, clustered with its takeaway joints, past the aardvark and into the student quarter. By then I could barely find the energy to lift my head, staring at the pavement, sagging against Twill as she pulled me along. Oh hey, heads up, Your girlfriend's here, she said. What? Where? Rain had come to meet us. She was still halfway down the street when our eyes met. The sweetest relief. Almost an injustice to my actual rescuers. Twill and Preem and Tenny had done the work, the violence, and in Tenny's case the getting beaten up. Rain sped up and jogged the final stretch to me, my own legs giving up from emotional overload. Twill let me go and I fell into Rain's arms, utterly uncaring of the spectacle we presented for the few daytime pedestrians. Neither of us spoke. She held me up. I buried my face in her shoulder and whined. One tiny lesbian delivered, Twill said, and flicked a mock salute. Safe and almost sound, I guess. Dunno what's wrong with her. Heather. Rain spoke my name. Had to do brain math, I groaned. Self-defense. Everything hurts. You're safe now, it's okay, we'll get you home. I'm sorry, I ruined the new hoodie. Got blood sick It'll wash right out, no worries. Rain rubbed my back and squeezed me, almost too hard. Despite the embrace which I needed so badly, she was tense all the way through, staring over my head, down the length of the street. She'd augmented her leather jacket with black gloves and a tote bag. I didn't care to speculate as to the contents. I owe you one, Twill, Rain said. Big time. Twill pulled a goofy grin and actually blushed. It was a team effort, you know. Couldn't a done it without she eyed Preem, frowning a little. You know, I never did ask your name, did I? Preem stared at her with those blank white eyes. Tenny helped too, I managed. She's hurt. She is? Rain asked, surprise in her voice. It fought for you. Tenny friend. Who? Twill said. What? Twill, said Rain. Don't jump out of your skin like a cartoon character when I say this, okay? What? That's not a person. She nodded at Preem. It's Evie's bound demon. What? Twill almost did jump out of her skin, wide-eyed and alert at Preem. She took a very deliberate step back. The blue skin didn't give it away. Rain asked. Her name is Preem. Call her Preem, I mumbled. Twill boggled at the pair of us, as if we were all insane. Right, okay, teach me to ask too many questions. Look, we don't have time for sodding tea and cake out here, we've got some lumbering jackass on our tail. Haven't seen her for a few, but she keeps popping up, some real spooky nonsense. Yeah, I know, said Rain. We can't stay here. You know. Remote viewing. Rain nodded at Preem again. Evie's been seeing through her eyes this whole time. How do you think I knew what route you were taking? Oh, I guess. Twill squinted in a deeply confused frown, putting two and two together a little slowly. Rain went very still. There she is. For a confused moment I thought she meant Evelyn, and raised my head to look. Zhang lurked at the end of Abbott's Lane, standing in the mouth of an alleyway next to an Indian takeaway place. Hands in her pockets, eyes staring, unmoving. Rain raised one hand in a wide gesture, pointed two fingers at her own eyes, then jabbed one at Zhang. For a moment, just a moment, Rain radiated menace. Murderous intent, the will to violence thrumming through every muscle. If I hadn't been so utterly wiped out, I don't know how that would have affected me arousal or cold terror. Zhang stared a moment longer, then turned and vanished down the alleyway. Twill flexed her hands like claws, but she refrained from transformation out in public. Oh, I'm gonna go rip her spine out. Wouldn't do that if I were you, Rain murmured. Odds on that's a trap. We're all carrying seals against blundering into their closed-loop spaces, but you're not. What? Twill looked like she'd been asked to comprehend a page of quantum mathematics. What is even going on here? I mean, yeah, the cult's bad business and all that, but like, stalking and kidnapping in broad daylight? Something's up, isn't it? Did Say piss them off? Rain considered Twill very carefully, then raised an eyebrow at Preem. You get all that, Evie? Can we let her in on this? Twill visibly bristled. Hey, I just saved your girlfriend's arse from Dash. Evelyn is unsure, Preem informed us. Say can shove it Dash. I whined. I just want to go home. Rain and Twill looked at each other over my head. What now then? Twill grunted. Am I coming or not? You heard the lady, said Rain. This is the Say house. Look, I know was all ballsy about going in there before, but maybe I should just call it a day and go home. Twill stared up at number 12, Barnslow Drive and shook her head. What are you talking about? I said. It's a lovely house. Wait a sec, this is home for you. You're living in there? Yes. Well, mostly. I get Rain and Say, but damn. What's a matter? Too spoopy for you, Scooby-Doo. Rain said. She pushed the garden gate open, my hand tight in hers. Snot that. Twill swallowed. She didn't even rise to the dog joke. This is the Say house. Isn't it full of ghosts? Ghosts? I said. Yeah, ghosts and monsters and stuff. You're a pretty scary monster in your own right, last time I checked. Yeah, but I'm a nice one. Friendly neighborhood werewolf. This place is a hell house. My physical condition had improved slightly over the final stretch home, perhaps due to the placebo of Rain's presence. Now I could walk mostly unaided, at a pace faster than a shuffle, but I still very much needed a sit-down, a large glass of water, a bath, and a 16-hour nap. Twill hesitated at the garden gate as Rain opened the front door. Preem did not stand on ceremony, she went straight inside. Tenny was still reluctant to cross the garden wall, but she ghosted around the side of the house, heading for the back garden. It's not scary inside, at all. Either come in or go away, I said to Twill. Make up your mind, I must sit down. Twill gritted her teeth, plucked up her not inconsiderable courage, and stepped onto the garden path. She looked exactly like a wary hound, shoulders hunched, head down, each footstep carefully measured. Rain rolled her eyes and laughed. She ushered me indoors first, eager to get me out of the open. The heat was on full blast inside, dousing me and my aching chest with a muscle-melting wave of warm air. I steadied myself against the wall. Get that door closed. Evelyn snapped. She scowled, looking almost as bad as I felt, eyes ringed with tension, knuckles tight on the grip of her walking stick, mouth a sour line. She hissed a command to Preem without turning. The demon host stepped into the kitchen. Twill stuck her head through the front door and peered around. Is Dash in or out? Evelyn snapped. You're a dog, not a cat. Twill bared her teeth and growled, but then caught the smirk on Rain's face and stepped inside with a sigh. Rain threw the locks and bolts and rattled the door handle, then closed her eyes, and let out a long sigh. That's it. We're all in, Evelyn said. She let out a huge sigh too and drew one hand over her face. A spike of guilt worked its way between my ribs, tender and raw even over the exhaustion and residual brain math pain. Evelyn looked that way because of me. Rain had worried and feared because of me, because I made a stupid mistake and put myself in danger. Perhaps it was the delayed emotional impact of a failed kidnapping attempt. I started to choke up, bit my bottom lip and sniffed. Tears filled my eyes. I am sorry, I stammered, gulped down the lump in my throat. I'm sorry, Evie. I dash. She marched up to me, face set, walking stick clacking on the floorboards, and I was certain she was going to shout at me or slap me. Rain seemed to think so too, turning and putting out a hand to stall Evelyn, a gentle rebuke on her lips. Evelyn threw her arms around me and hugged me tight. Best as she could, with her bad posture and unstable legs and walking stick in one hand, she gave me a hug. It was awkward and difficult, and I stained her shoulder with my stalled tears, but she made it count. "You absolute fool," she said, face hidden over my shoulder. I think she was choked up too. Even Twill had enough sense not to ruin the moment with dumb jokes. She and Rain busied themselves by taking their shoes off, and Rain even politely asked if Twill wanted to hang her coat up. By the time they were done pretending to be normal, Evelyn had pulled back, covertly wiped her eyes on her sleeve, and told me it was okay. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," said Evelyn. "I don't know what I was thinking." "I do. You were thinking you're still living a normal life. You weren't thinking like a mage. Rain isn't my bodyguard just for show." "Really?" Rain pulled a grin. "And here I thought you kept me around for my stunning good looks." Evelyn rolled her eyes. I sniffed and managed a small laugh. Rain winked at the both of us, a covert hand on my back. "Is this it?" Twill's voice echoed from the kitchen. She was poking her head around the door frame, then turned back to look at us. "This is the Say house. This place is a dump." "Excuse me." "It's lovely." "Don't be so rude," I said. Twill shrugged and puffed out one cheek. She padded over to the disused sitting room and peered inside there as well. I nudged limply at one shoe with my other foot, well aware I'd fall over if I bent down to unlace them properly, doubly aware that I'd never muster the energy to stand up if I sat. Rain held my hand and supported me as I shoved my shoes off. Preem reappeared with a glass of water and a blister packet of cocotamol, and held them out to me. I muttered a thanks. "What were you expecting then?" said Evelyn. Twill shrugged. "I dunno, spooky stuff." "Indulge me. Use your imagination, if you have any. Think of it as the toll for entering." "I dunno. Bleeding walls. Echoing voices. Weird faces in the ceiling. This is just an old house. I'm so terribly sorry to disappoint you." Twill rolled her eyes. "Why are you always so goddamn rude to me?" "I'm not. Thank you for saving my friend." Twill gaped. "Whoa. You dash. And now you're here, do I have to have you murdered, or are you going to keep your hands off my books?" "Evie." I squeaked on Twill's behalf. "I'm joking," Evelyn said. "A little self-satire." "Ha ha." Twill snorted. "Touch my books and I will put a leash on you though." "Hey." "I won't, what do you think I dash?" Twill cut off first, but we all felt the change in the air, the rising of the little hairs on the back of one's neck, the chill from a hidden door, though I was the only one who could see the cause. Two of Evelyn's spider servitors scuttled into the front room. They'd entered at the same moment from two different directions, one hanging upside down from over the stairs and the other creeping around the kitchen doorway. Segmented limbs blurred and paused and readjusted, bunched crystalline eyes swiveled and fixed, until they had Twill flanked from both sides. "You know what, I think I do." "Freaky." Rain put her hands on her hips and glanced about. Evie?" I said. The spiders edged closer to Twill, stinger tips quivering, as if they expected her to run. Evelyn frowned at me. "Security system, yes." I nodded. "Two spiders." "Spiders?" Twill jerked as if prodded with a cattle goad. "What spiders?" "Spider ghosts." "You're kidding me." She growled low in her throat and ceased to be entirely human, arms and hands overlaid with that flicker-wisp wolf flesh. Her face elongated into a snout. "Stop that," Evelyn snapped, then turned to me. "Point." I did. "Both hands." She grunted. A nasty smirk crossed her face. "On second thought, perhaps it would be funnier to let Twill fight something she can't see." "Say." Twill growled through her canine snout. "I swear I'll dash." I'm joking. Evelyn raised her chin and reeled off a long, complex sentence of Latin, followed by a pause and another sentence. She looked at me for confirmation. That did not work. No change. Evelyn scowled, adjusted her grip on her walking stick, and banged it against the floor. She barked something in Latin which was almost certainly not a ritualized command or high-minded construction, but more of a colorful suggestion. I winced too and prayed I'd never give Evelyn cause to yell at me. The spider servitors jerked back and reconsidered, scuttled away to the edges of the room and slowly retreated the way they came. Oh. I blinked. I guess they decided Twill is less scary than you. As they well should, Evelyn grumbled. Haunted bloody madhouse, I told you so. Twill growled through too many sharp teeth, huffing and puffing behind a veil of hair. Put yourself away, Evelyn said. Twill did, straightening up and sweeping her hair back from her face, human again. She shook herself and puffed out a long breath. What the hell, say? What the hell is going on? What's this all about? Rain began to help me toward the kitchen, but Evelyn stood stock still, staring at Twill. What? What? Twill demanded. I'm deciding how much I can tell you. About what? I'm sorry, Heather. I'm really, really sorry. I mean it. I really tried to stop them, please don't hate me. I don't think I could stand it if you hated me. Dream awareness blossomed in my mind. Lozzie was hugging me tight. She was sniffing, crying with her head buried in my shoulder. She smelled of shampoo and strawberries, but then this was a dream, she could smell however she chose to however my mind chose for her. We were both on our knees in a dark place, arms around each other. I blinked and found I was crying too, gripped by the alchemy of shared emotional release, whoever and whatever she was. I hugged her back, patting her shoulders, feeling awkward but touched. It's okay, I said. It's not okay. She pulled back and showed me a face that could move a heart of stone. That fey, elfin face, running with tears and red around the eyes, wisps of blonde hair in disarray. They're not allowed to do those things to you, they shouldn't. I hate them all, especially my brother. I hate him so much, I wish he would die. She kicked out in frustration. Her foot connected with a pile of books and sent them scattering across the wooden floor. I looked over at them. Then up. And up. And up. The bookcases stretched up forever, until they vanished into the dark far above. Crisscrossed with wooden stairways and ledges, balconies and rails, looped around each other, to offer access to any of the billions of volumes. A vast canyon, which Lozzie and I sat at the very bottom of, on a polished wooden floor at least a mile across, littered with thousands of stay texts. Vertigo touched my head. I looked back to Lozzie. Where is this place? She sniffed and looked pitiful. The library at Carcosa. I thought it might cheer you up. You love books and stuff, right? I do love books. I risked another glance up. In a way, it's beautiful, yes. So, you don't hate me? What? No. Oh, Heather. Lozzie hugged me again, clung to me and buried her face in my shoulder. I hate that they scared you. I hate him so much. Gears turned in my mind, realization clicking into place. My brother. I hate him. You told me about him before it happened. In a dream. How is that possible? I muttered. He thinks he can stop us, thinks he can stop us going places, stop us living, control us. Lozzie pulled back and met my gaze, her eyes burning with conviction. A smile crested her face through the crying. But you can go anywhere you want. We can go anywhere, Heather. Like here. She waved up at the titanic bookcases, and I made myself look again. Made myself see the tiny shuffling figures on the walkways, with robes and lanterns and faces made of tentacles and spines. I noticed the hanging cages filled with desiccated, inhuman corpses, saw the confluence of vast meter-thick chains which held an unspeakable monster, bound high in the air between the two rows of bookshelves. Like here, I echoed. The very next morning I moved in for real. Rain wouldn't let me go anywhere alone. I didn't want to, anyway. I'd barely slept that night, ragged with adrenaline, chased by aftershocks of paranoia, plagued by incessant throbbing pain in my diaphragm. I finally conked out from sheer exhaustion after midnight, snuggled up to Rain to keep the dark at bay. We used her rickety car to empty my flat. Truly empty it, as per Evelyn's emphatic instructions. Clothes and books shoved into plastic carrier bags, university notes and course paperwork jammed into my little used backpack, my laptop wrapped with jumpers and hidden in a sports bag alongside my few valuables. Toiletries, kitchen utensils, mugs, everything of mine. Rain even pulled the sheets and sad flat pillow off my mattress. A strand of hair for a voodoo doll is not quite accurate, that little won't matter. Shouldn't matter, Evelyn had said, earlier that morning, when we'd gathered around the kitchen table. But we don't want them getting anything that belongs to you. Anything with a strong emotional connection. Why? What could they do? She'd shrugged. I don't know. Better safe than sorry, Rain had added. And better now than later. Let's get it done. The sum physical total of my life seemed small and pathetic in the back of Rain's car. A few bags, not enough to fill the boot. I didn't even have that many books, not ones I really owned. At least this way I'd finally be adding myself to the house, with Rain and Evelyn, a true accepted part, but as I stood by Rain's car and glanced back at the impassive gray block of flats, I wished this had happened in any other way. Don't tell me you're actually going to miss this place? Rain asked. She was leaning on the roof of her car with the door open, ready to leave. I shook my head. Not in the slightest. Horrible impersonal box. We're not meant to live alone in concrete cells. I'm sorry, Heather. She swallowed, a tiny catch in her voice. I'm sorry I made you stay here longer than you had to. I should have had you at the house from the word go. I should have been there. Don't, I said, a little too hard. We've already been over this. It was my fault. Rain opened her mouth again but thought better of arguing. Her confidence and her smile flowed back by easy degrees. Ready to go, then? Suppose we shouldn't stay out in the open for too long, Heather, I'm right here with you. You are always safe. I know, I know. I'm sorry I said that, I feel normal, I guess. I'm just being bitter. I shrugged. The shock had worn off, normality had reasserted itself. Wasn't I supposed to be a flinching sobbing mess? I'd almost been kidnapped. How was this meant to feel? You can always tell me if you dash. Let's go. Let's go home and cuddle. Please. Rain cracked a grin. You're the boss. Evie is the closest we have to a boss. Don't flatter me. However much it works. Whatever you say, boss. Last night, after the failed kidnapping attempt, Twill had been furious. Absorbed in my own pain and desperate need to rest, I'd failed to notice at first. Rain had half-carried me upstairs and ran a bath, while I dozed off sitting on the floor. She'd pulled me back to my feet, to much of my own grumbling and groaning, but I hadn't thought to question why she seemed tense. She helped me undress a decidedly unsexy encounter, believe me, and made me get in the bath. The water revived me somewhat, especially after I dunked my face and head to scrub off the remaining flecks of blood and wash away the taste of sick. Rain stroked my wet hair. I can't tell you how glad I am that you're safe. How do you feel? Numb. Numb. I'm sorry I caused all that, Rain. She shook her head. Don't be. You survived. Self-defense, whatever it was. You called and we came. God alone knows how you kept those bastards talking as long as you did. You're good at that, you know. I am. We saw everything from the moment Preem turned up, through the scrying pool, but Evie'll want you to fill her about on the rest. Don't think about it for now, okay? You concentrate on soaking yourself. Will you be okay here on your own for a few minutes? I need to go downstairs, just a couple of minutes. I'm not going to fall unconscious and drown. She watched me carefully, the same way she had when she thought I might have been concussed. I raised my eyebrows in silent question, all I could manage at the moment. That's not what I meant. Are you going to be okay being alone? Oh, I think so. I'm in the house. We're all here. The door's locked. I'm fine, go do what you need to do. Shout if you change your mind. I very nearly did. Rain's footsteps creaked down the stairs. I was alone with the steam and the silence and the drip of water from the bath tap. The heat had unknotted my muscles and begun to make inroads on the exhaustion, blunt the sharpest edges of the day. I should have been relaxed and warm, felt safe and cared for, surrounded by friends. So why was I shaking? My hands shook. I squeezed them into fists, felt my breath catch in my throat, shivering all over. My mind replayed disconnected snippets of memory, the feeling of being grabbed and pushed to the ground, the bowel-loosening terror of Zhang advancing on me, the oily sound of Alexander's voice. I gulped and sniffed and drew my knees up to my chest, then dipped my head into the bath until I was chin-deep, squeezed my eyes shut and made myself small, a tiny scrap of flesh hanging in warm water, trying to be still. A shout and a crash from downstairs jarred me so badly I whacked my elbow against the bathtub, wincing through my teeth. My heart leapt from 0 to 60. Rain! I shouted. Rain! She shot up the stairs in record time and slipped back into the bathroom, almost out of breath, one hand out. Nothing's happening, it's fine, I promise. What was that? What's going on? Evie and Twill are having a, she hesitated, then sighed and shrugged. Jurisdictional disagreement. I shook my head. They're biting each other's heads off, she said. My eyes went wide. Rain, last time they had an argument, they almost killed each other. Exactly. Her smile turned sheepish. Which is why I dash. Go, go. I shoot her back out the door with one hand. I'm fine, I'm dash. You sure? I'm sure. Go stop our friends from knocking the walls down. There was a lot more shouting, punctuated by one or two loud thumps, hands slapped on tables, perhaps, but no more crashing and banging. The bathwater had begun to cool by the time Rain returned again. An unexpected peace has broken out, she said. Thank God for that. I needed a hand out of the bath to avoid slipping and landing on my face, and appreciated the company as I tugged on pajama bottoms and a nice big fluffy sweater, the minimal requirements to stave off further shaking and shivering. Downstairs, our resident mage and teenage werewolf stewed on opposite sides of the kitchen table, a peace offering of tea half finished on Twill's side and barely touched on Evelyn's. At least they hadn't thrown fireballs or claws this time, and weren't so self-absorbed as to ignore me when I shuffled in. They both spoke at once. Heather, how are Dash? There you are, Rain got you up, Dash. I said we'd need you here, Dash. Can't believe this bullshit, Dash. Have you two quite finished? I mumbled. Didn't have the energy to raise my voice. They both stammered to a halt. Evelyn shot a sidelong glare at Twill, who shrugged and flopped her hands. Told you she'd be pissed, Rain added. I fell into the chair she pulled out for me. Actually, I'm not angry. I think you two making all that racket staved off a panic attack. What? Rain said, a gentle hand on the back of my head. Panic attack. Heather, are you okay? I shrugged. I'm fine. I think I started to have a panic attack in the bath. I don't know. Yeah. You almost got snatched in the street. Anyone piss themselves? Twill-eyed Evelyn. Snatched by something I should have known about though. Stop your whining. With the invaluable assistance of microwave Chinese food, and the tribute of 2 offerings from Rain's secret stash of chocolate bars, I told them everything, from the top, starting with Tenny's warning and ending with as much of Alexander Lilburn's disgusting monologuing as I could remember. Details eluded me, memory fuzzy and heavy. The physical confrontation in that tangled back alley was the hardest part to recount. Rain picked up on my mood, stood behind me and rubbed my back, but Twill didn't understand what I was getting at. How could she? She'd been invincible and untouchable for years. What do you mean, you made him vanish? Just like, poof, into thin air. She raised an eyebrow at Evelyn. Is that even a thing? I looked away, a lump in my throat, didn't want to think about that right now. For Heather, yes, said Evelyn. So it does work on living things. I don't know. Twill's eyes widened and her voice dropped to a hushed whisper. Wait a moment, you mean you can send people to like, the other side? Outside, I muttered. Yeah, that's what I said. Holy shit. You're not kidding, right? Could you please not? Twill didn't press any further, but she frowned at me like I was either crazy or a walking neutron bomb. Maybe she was right. Evelyn asked endless questions about the cultists. She got me to describe Alexander Lilburn in as much detail as I could. Didn't you see him, through Preem? I asked. Evelyn shook her head. Not a good look, no. She wrote down what I said, dismissed their names as probably fake, and descended into dark brooding. She stared at the tabletop, chin in her hand. Consumed with thought. Call me useless, call my work useless. Must be a bluff. They know I'm close. Knew my mother. Nonsense. Who is he? God damn it all, I may even have met him once, when I was a child, or seen him at a distance. Are you going to kill him? I asked. Heather. Rain said, surprised at my tone. I didn't meet her eyes. I think that's a fine suggestion, said Evelyn. Yes, threaten my friends, in my city. I'm going to feed him to a creature he couldn't even imagine. That's cool and all, Twill said, kicking back in her chair, rocking it onto 2 legs with her hands on the table for balance. But still I've got to tell my parents about this. No, Evelyn snapped, hard and blunt. You don't. Twill, how many times dash? Don't start up again, I said. Or I shall be angry. Twill smirked and mock cowered from me. You're real scary when you're angry, you know. As if I could scare you. You can make people vanish. That's pretty scary. I curled up a little tighter in my chair. Evelyn was glancing back and forth between us, her discomfort visibly mounting. Must you dash? She cut off and shot an apologetic look at me before resuming with Twill. Must you run to your family with your tail between your legs over every little thing? I am not in the habit of losing. I beat my own mother, a mage 10 times, 100 times more powerful than these petty amateurs. This is pest control, at best. Then why haven't you won yet? Evelyn's glare could have frozen the sun. Twill rolled her eyes. I came into town to buy a video game today. Any of my family could wander in here by accident. I didn't even know this was going on. I've gotta warn my parents, say, don't be bonkers. I've gotta tell the church. You do the same, come off it. Then you can tell them to stay out of it too. Make that clear. You sure? I dunno, say, maybe we could you know. Twill shrugged, the very picture of a sulky teenager. I know what. Maybe we could pitch in. Your lot. Don't make me laugh. I'd like to see you try. The Sherrowford cult waited less than 48 hours before they began to stalk me. Rain was a saint, she really was. I don't know how she put up with my grim mood. I started that week in a downward spiral of grumpy and jittery, and only got worse with every passing day. Finally moving in together was what I'd wanted all along, true togetherness, a new measure of safety, for Rain's bedroom to be our bedroom, but I felt restless, irritable, not entirely like myself. I gave myself a break from the pamphlet and my brain math training, a much-needed period of recovery for my aching diaphragm. I pretended to be normal, worked on my end-of-term essays, tried to impose some order and cleanliness on the house's ancient rambling kitchen. The first goat statue greeted me in the university library. Rain was only 10 feet away, at the end of the row of shelves. I'd stepped away from her to replace a book I didn't strictly need, and there it was, standing in the gap I'd pulled the book from only minutes before. An ugly little thing made of pewter or thick discolored porcelain, only an inch tall from wide base to horn tips, it stared at me with holes for eyes. A cheap gewgaw, poor approximation of the real animal. Real goats were sort of cute, this thing was horrible. I didn't want to touch it, as much from physical disgust as the odd sense it had appeared from nowhere. A student prank, I told myself. Somebody had walked past and slipped it in here. Perhaps it had some obscure political meaning. I was hypersensitive, hypervigilant, still in shock. The goat figurine meant nothing. I used the book to shove it into the depths of the shelf and said nothing about it to Rain, forgot it by the time we left the library. The second one turned up the next day, in the ladies' toilet, on the edge of the sink when I went to wash my hands. It hadn't been there when I walked in. Nobody had followed me. Rain was right outside the door. I almost screamed. Rain balled that one up in her jumper and took it home for Evie to investigate, a trip which had me walking on needles the entire way, Rain's head on a swivel for unseen watchers. It was a trap, I knew it, a contact drug or a magical trick or a disguised monster or... It's inert. Nothing. Just a bloody china figurine, Evelyn said 2 hours later, as she scooped the goat statue up with bare hands from the center of a magic circle. But it wasn't there when I went in. It wasn't, I swear. I believe you. But it's also inert. We should get rid of it anyway. Please. We should, Evelyn agreed. On it, said Rain. She took the bus into town and dropped the goat in the river. Another one appeared the next day, in the library again. This time none of us bothered to touch the thing. Why stalk me, I thought, why not Evelyn? Because I'm an easier target, because she's the big scary mage, because she'll notice the sleight of hand and catch the culprit. I just have to cower and run. The goat brought friends odd scraps of paper with a single eye design on them, staring and watching. I saw one pinned on a university notice board, another one on a telephone pole on the route home. Rain ripped them both down, but it made no difference. I felt like I was being watched, in the library, in the campus canteen, everywhere but at home. The worst was in lectures and seminars, when I wasn't with Rain. Neither Evelyn or I went anywhere alone. Rain became my shadow, the need for coordination that much sharper. I did a lot of waiting around, less in the library and more in the medieval metaphysics room, a safe bolt hole where I didn't feel that creeping sensation, reading books and writing paragraphs about Hamlet and Joyce, immersing myself in literature to forget what was happening to us. Evelyn had Preem escort her most of the time, and once she sent the demon host to the library to collect me without warning. I jumped and swallowed a shriek when I'd noticed her waiting in silence behind my chair. Twice I caught half-hidden glimpses of a figure watching the house at night, down at the end of the road. The first time I'd been getting up to use the toilet, and my sleep-addled mind passed by the sight through a window, a half-remembered impression, forgotten in the light of the morning. The second time I'd been unable to sleep, reading in Evelyn's study, pacing up and down to tire myself out, when I'd looked up through the window and seen the figure motionless at the end of the street. I'd watched for a minute, 2 minutes, not a twitch, frozen in paranoid fear. The first time had come rushing back to me, and I'd gone rushing to Rain, to wake her up. She'd gone out into the night with silent feet and a kitchen knife in her jacket, but by the time she reached the end of the road the figure had vanished. Evelyn sunk into a deep, dark, brooding sulk, more and more time spent in the drawing room, just staring at the doorway mural and swapping sigils and bits of design back and forth, trying to crack some incomprehensible code. I kept putting off calling my parents, debating what to say. They'd need to know I'd moved, cancelled the rent, either be delighted or terrified if I told them I was living with friends in a shared house, all that nice clean sanitized language of young people at university. The truth was impossible to share. They felt distant, unreal, part of an old life. "Hi Mum, hi Dad, I'm learning how to rescue my lost twin sister from an alien god." "What's that?" "No, it'll probably kill me before I'm done, if I don't end up as collateral damage in a war between a mage and a bunch of cultists." "The mage, oh no, she's my friend, we're all friends here, except the one I make out with every day." Things I could not say to my parents. Concepts I didn't want them to think about. Ever. On the 8th morning after the failed kidnapping attempt, I woke from an awful nightmare. Not an eye nightmare, we kept the fractal fresh, made it into a nice little shared ritual before sleep every night. My left arm laid across Rain's lap as she traced over the lines with the body art pen. No, it was a normal nightmare, one that had me kicking and thrashing myself awake in bed, elbowing Rain in the stomach and choking on a mouthful of my own saliva. A nightmare about being grabbed and held down, about towering, indistinct figures, stronger than me, about being trapped, taken away to dark places, about horrible goat faces and the feeling of being watched and followed. I was monosyllabic, foul-tempered, and cold, all day. Rain deserved me better than that. Deserved better than me using her for a hug and struggling to express myself. That evening, when Evelyn had vanished into the drawing room and I was about to drag myself up from a finished plate of chips, Rain thumped a bottle of vodka down on the kitchen table. I looked up at her, framed by the shadows and the early sunset through the kitchen window. "Rain. You and I are going to drink together." "What?" I blinked at her, then at the bottle. "Cossack vodka," she said with a proud smile. "Genuinely not that easy to get hold of. No idea why, not like it's expensive or anything. Goes down a bit smoother than the supermarket crap, thought you might find it a bit easier." I started to shake my head, a lump growing in my throat. "Oh, Rain, no. I'm sorry, I know I've been awful all day, but I can't solve that with alcohol." "You're not going to. We're gonna drink, together." She left the bottle in front of me and fetched glasses from the kitchen cupboard. I ran a finger over the condensation on the bottle, crisp and cold. "I haven't drunk any alcohol since you gave me that one shot of vodka. I don't know if I should risk it." "Well, you don't have to think about that, because I ain't giving you a choice." Rain clacked the glasses down on the table. I huffed and frowned. At her. "That's hardly healthy. My lover forcing me to drink. You don't have to get me drunk to have fun with me." "It's not about that," she said softly. "You know it's not about that." I cleared my throat, felt sheepish, looked away. "Fine. You don't have to drink much." She poured a finger or two of vodka into each glass. "Just sip it. Don't try to keep up with me, seriously, you'll end up under the table." The vodka in my glass caught the light as the sharp ethanol scent tickled my nose. I picked it up and felt my saliva glands tingle in anticipation. "I suppose dash." Rain slammed back her shot and poured another. I goggled at her but she just laughed and shrugged. We discovered that even in small smooth sips I still couldn't drink the stuff. The taste made me cough, made my eyes water, a lava flow of heat crawling down my throat. Rain relented and we came up with a compromise. I made a pot of strong tea and she added a slug of vodka to my mug. That was much easier, along with the can of nuts Rain produced for the occasion. One mug of vodka-laced tea later my head began to feel both heavier and lighter, my eyelids like wet paper and my chest warm inside. Rain didn't look the slightest bit worse for wear. You had an utter screamer of a nightmare last night, didn't you? She asked. I sighed a huge sigh and drained the dregs of my drink, then stared into the bottom of the empty mug. Did I cry out in my sleep? Nah, but I could tell. You were so shaky this morning, I wanted to make you stay home, but she smiled, indulgent and a little sad. The alcohol cut through all my inhibitions, my paranoia, my fear. I feel violated, I admitted. Something hard unknotted in my chest, a deep-rooted tension beginning to unwind. Rain raised her eyebrows and nodded for me to go on. The rest of it, the coffee shop, the brain math, the giant zombie woman, whatever, that was scary, yes, that was all terrifying. But the worst part was the bit in the back alleyway, with that bee bastard who grabbed me. I keep replaying it in my head. Keeps coming back to me. I hate it. Hate is okay. It's not, it's unhealthy, I said. I feel vulnerable. I've always felt vulnerable, but this is new. It's not that I don't like you coming everywhere with me, Rain. I love it when you hold my hand. I love you being there and being around. For the first time since Maisie, I'm not lonely all the time, but I wish it wasn't a necessity. I wish I didn't have to feel paranoid. Why are they stalking me? What do they want with me? Help me with this. Rain had some colorful suggestions. She poured me a second mug of tea and vodka. I sipped at it, unsure what helped more, the booze or the talking. I felt more relaxed than I'd been in days, even as I aired these dirty bits of my psyche. She got up and hugged me while I sat. I thought I was supposed to feel scared. Jump at loud noises. That sort of thing, but I'm mostly just angry. That's normal, I think, Rain offered. What am I supposed to do about this? This. Rain grinned and raised her empty glass. I don't have a magic bullet for trauma dash. It's hardly trauma. It is. It totally is. Rain frowned. Some dickless wonder assaulted you and scary people tried to kidnap you, and if I could get my hands on them I'd kill them all. It's trauma. And there's no magic solution, but talking helps. I learnt that together with Evelyn, and you're easily as tough as she is. If you say so. I grumbled and sipped more tea. Rain. Now it was my turn to get up and hug her, put my arms around her. The alcohol made me slow and floppy. She clung to me and we both started crying together, not the big racking sobs of true despair or pain, but an odd weepy emotional release, sniffing and smiling and laughing at each other as we tried to stop crying. You don't have to protect me all the time. I want to. Because you're you. Don't get kidnapped, you're too important to get kidnapped. I can't go back to cruising for girls now, Heather, I'm hooked on you, I want you safe and on my lap and dash. I want that too. I declared at the ceiling. Evelyn thumped on the connecting wall 3 times. We both burst out laughing, wiping away our tears. I did a huge shush motion, and Rain mouthed a thank you as I slowly sat back down. Rain wavered slightly, slow to blink and flushed in the face as she rolled her empty glass across the table. You did kill that guy, though, she said. That doesn't help. I put my head on the table, emotionally wiped out but no longer so twisted up inside. Actually, I think maybe it makes it worse. He's dead, I killed him. I didn't even really mean to, I wasn't trying to kill him, just wanted him to stop. Rain puffed out a long sigh. I don't know if I can help with that one. I wish I could. It's never bothered me before, the few times I've had to do it. No. I grumbled and rubbed my cheek on the table. That's the problem. I don't care either. Rain blinked at me. I don't care that I killed a person. But I care that I don't care, if that makes sense. I paused and frowned. Is this what being drunk is like? Rain laughed. No, you're barely buzzed. You're such a lightweight, it's cute as hell. Lightweight. Yes. I weigh 105 pounds fully dressed. I am drunk. We drank more, or rather, Rain did, cranking back the booze until she sat loose and lounging in her chair. I stared at her from the table as she sniffed and seemed to rouse herself toward some difficult topic. You know, Heather, I think I'm falling in love with you. Don't. I whined. Don't say that while drunk. Ah. Rain tapped the table. I didn't say, I love you, I'll say that bit sober. I said I think I am falling. That's different. I grumbled, pouting. I've never been in love before. Been in lust a lot, but this is way different. What, you don't lust for me? I smiled a little, felt oddly cheeky. She grinned back. What do you think? I think, you are, a bit of a slut. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, a bad dirty joke which made me blink, sit up, and cover my mouth in mortified horror. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. It was Dash. Rain started laughing and couldn't stop, slapped the table and pointed at me. It's the booze, Heather. It's loosened you up. I don't think you're a slut. I don't think that. Oh my God. But it's a good joke. I have slept with a lot of girls, that part's true. But that doesn't, there's nothing wrong with, oh, blast it. Does that bother you? No. No. It's actually sort of hot. I looked away, confused and reeling at myself. Rain grinned. Call me a slut again, see what happens. I stared at her, flushed and breathless. You're too drunk for sex. Sure, but not too drunk to come over there and tickle you. You wouldn't dare. We didn't drink any more, but we did get louder, the jokes getting weirder, until Rain had me laughing so badly I got a stitch in my side and she kept banging the table to punctuate her points. I'd never felt like this ever before. Days of tension slid off me, off us, and I could almost see it leaving, flowing down into the floor and away under the house. The door to the ex-drawing room opened by a crack. Evelyn peered at us as she emerged. Are you two making enough noise out here? Oh bloody hell, you're drinking. You are wrong. We have finished drinking, Rain corrected her with a wave of one finger. And we are now drunk. I'm sorry, we were being so loud. I pulled myself up and made an effort to sit straight, to look sensible and sober, but then snorted with laughter at my own act. Evelyn stepped into the kitchen and raised an eyebrow, not exactly impressed but not scowling either. Is this a mating ritual? No. I whined. Yeah, I'm way too sloshed to take her upstairs now. Rain yawned and stood up, poured herself a glass of water, then pressed a second one into my hands. Drink up. I don't need Dash. Yes, you do, Evelyn snapped. I'm not having you two hung over tomorrow. We have work to do. We do. I asked, and almost spilled water down myself as I drank. Work? What's this slave driver stuff? Rain grinned. Tomorrow's a Friday, Heather's the only one with a lecture. Evelyn snorted. While you two were stress testing your livers, I've been working on a few little tricks. A portable viewing circle, some barrier pieces, even a potential permanent invisus oculus, something my mother never figured out, but which you've given me the pieces for, Heather. I shared a glance with Rain. She shrugged, downed another glass of water, and put what was left of the vodka safely away in the fridge. Which means what? I asked, trying to sober up for real. Evelyn smiled a smug little smile, that sharp edge appearing around her eyes. We're going to do some veterinary care. On what? Your little friend. You mean Tenny? Exactly.